All right, are you ready? Good evening, appreciators and aficionados. My name is TB Skyen. Welcome to a little live stream that I'm doing with this digital ghost dude over here. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely, I would. Hi, folks. I am Lushen Zener, failed experiment in psychic espionage, hungry ghost, and variety VTuber. You can see my link above, right above my head, and also you can catch me on YouTube streaming weird games like AI's The Somnium Files, and occasional 3D printing and DIY projects.
Yeah, and Lushen suggested that we discuss the design principles of Monster Girls, and specifically how well or how poorly a couple of big companies tend to handle these. So we'll be talking a little bit about Blizzard. We'll be talking about Riot Games, of course, because this is my channel. And we'll be talking about Monster Girls in general. Yes, Lady Dimitrescu will come up, or Dimitrescu? How do you pronounce that word? I don't know. I keep getting shit for it.
Yeah, that's a hard one. Let's call her Lady D for now, because I gotta be honest,
yeah.
My pronunciation for it's also a little sus.
So, couple of ground rules for the stream is, like, we're going to be talking about Monster Girls. Obviously, a lot of them are hot. Obviously, a lot of them are meant to be sexy. Try to keep chat, like, not asexual or anything, but you know, it's just sort of friendly for everybody so that it's not, like, too horny or off-putting. Remember to stay hydrated, drink some water, and keep things relatively calm.
Yes.
Right.
Of course, a little horniness, a little thirstiness is inevitable, so I do recommend you getting a couple drinks first. Yes. Pretend that your most innocent friends are going to be reading while you're chatting over your shoulder, so play nice.
Yeah, and there's some discussion that I saw already in chat from people sort of getting on about what exactly constitutes a monster girl. With some people questioning, like, whether an orc would constitute a monster girl, whether a character like Lilia would constitute a monster girl, which I thought was interesting because, like, 10, 15 years ago, everyone would have said yes, I think.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, especially with the oldest Blizzard designs, right? Like, these are inevitably supposed to be monster girls. They are A, girls, very obviously so, and B, monsters, also very obviously so. Of course, we do have some stipulations about the fact that, for large part, Blizzard monster girl designs in particular aren't very, very good. Like, you take the orc examples where you given, and you can, especially you take the orc elven examples and compare them to the human models, you see that there aren't actually all that much differences between the human and the other female models in the game compared to the vast dimorphism you see with the male characters, right? Like, you're never going to confuse a troll with an orc's silhouette at first blush, but you could easily do so with a troll female and an orc female and a human female.
Yeah, and that's the picture I've got up on screen right now, which is something that Blizzard is kind of famous for, which is that extreme sexual dimorphism in their monster characters. The orcs in particular, I think, are instructive on this point because, wow. And that's one of the things that we'll be returning to a lot, I think, tonight, is that particular tendency of character designers to go, male monster, oh, big, scary, muscles, ugly face, ah. And then female monsters like, well, we gotta have the hips, though. Like, we have to have the hourglass shape, and there needs to be breasts. Like, they can't be girl without breasts. No breast, no girl. Not how it works. Which is like, it's just such a limitation on what most companies can do with the concept of the monster girl as a whole, which I always think is kind of a pity.
Yeah, I mean, not just the breast, but also has to have like lips, like certain length of eyelashes. Like the worst offender I've seen was probably from XCOM, actually, despite how much I love that game. But the snake woman they added in the latest XCOM, especially.
Oh yeah.
Like, why would you add tits to a reptilian creature that doesn't have any mammalian background in its DNA, right? But like, it's just like, it's the worst they can say about Blizzard is that they're generic. It's not as if that it's complete fallacy to assume that there's sexual dimorphism between orcs. But like right on the screen, why is there such a big difference between how the models are designed between like troll males versus like the fact that a troll female is almost basically identical to the orcs, or like even fundamentally identical to how the Draenei are presented, right? Yeah.
And it is the thing, like, because what's exciting about monsters is the ability to go beyond what's humanly possible, right? Like, we're doing character design, fine, we're bringing animal characteristics, like with the Tauren, we're bringing in, like, mythical characteristics, like with the trolls, or with the orcs, we're bringing in all this, like, chimeric inspiration, but then you look at the way it ends up a lot of the time, and it just kind of becomes this, like, oh, it's a hot person with, like, some bits attached.
Yeah. And, like, was that actually official art for the Forsaken there? Because if I recall correctly, the Forsaken were generally a little better, but ultimately, like, there were less monsters than their male counterparts, just like flat out, right? Like,
yeah.
In terms of like how much damage and scarring you would show on the female half of the cast, like in general, you're going to be seeing a lot more diversity amongst the male representatives, especially the ones that are actually written in the story rather than like player generated, than you would amongst the female versions and their female counterparts. To Blizzard's credit, though, I think they did get a little better with this over time. Obviously, the Tauren will probably had the most variation from the onset, but it was still like basically just a softer, rounder version of the male models. But what you see with the Worgen and the Pandaren later on, clearly there was some lessons taken to heart sometime down the road. It's just that it took them more like a decade to get to that point.
Yeah, and still, like, when I go through, like, I went through a lot of Blizzard art. A lot of the art you're seeing here, for example, is from Hearthstone, some of the more recent expansions. And when I went through it, like, the consistent thing that is, like, with all of the girls is, like, there is this tendency for all of them to be, well, first of all, skinny. Like, occasionally they get to be buff, but, like, all of them always skinny in a way that would be recognizable. Like, in a way that would mean if they put on the right costume, they could be Sylvanas Windrunner, for example.
Yeah.
Like that very narrow, limited range of body types that's available. And Kerrigan, who's up on screen right now, is one of the sort of examples of that, where her story is that she's this psychic ghost assassin person for the humans who gets captured by the Zerg, and they morph her and transform her into this horrifying monstrosity meant to destroy and lay waste to the universe. And then the actual form she ultimately takes is a hot lady. Like, where this like,
naked lady.
Yeah, where she's meant to be scary primarily because, like, she has strange colors and spikes. Which is one of those things, like, Kerrigan is iconic, by the way. Like, she's an iconic character, and I completely see the idea of, like, having a character like the idea of her being that she's escaping from a kind of repression and sort of fully coming into into her, like, her sexual power as a woman. Like, those ideas are there, but the thing that bothers me is that it's this over and over and over again when we have this female character who's, like, sexually unleashed and dangerous and femme fatale. It always looks like this. Every time it's this. And, like, lots of different women exist. Could maybe other expressions of femininity exist as versions of this, rather than just skinny hourglass-shaped titty?
Well, that's also the thing, right? This is a very like male-targeted version of like female sexuality unleashed. Whereas, I think we know enough of women in our life to ask them like, what would it actually look like if they were like fully unrepressed and just like gone mad with power, right? And it doesn't look like a bikini babe. It doesn't look like they're wearing a leotard.
Yeah, even for some probably, like the women are diverse, but it would look like many more different things than just this. Like, I'm sure this is very appealing for a lot of people, but my frustration is always the lack of diversity, that it's like, oh, yes, you can have this, but only this version. Only this one. Just this one.
Yeah.
And no matter how good that one is, it's like, yeah, but also, could we also other things? Maybe more different things as well also, plus the other thing.
Yeah, well, that's also the other spin of it, right? Like, to me, the Kerrigan image especially is more Zer's corrupted by human sensibilities rather than the other way around.
Yeah.
Like, what does fertility actually mean to a Zer, to a hive mind, right? And this is not something that's actually explored in the character design, which is a missed opportunity when you have basically what is a human Zer chimera.
Yeah.
And the same goes with like warrior characters like Katarin, like the orcs. Like, if you're talking about a highly militant, like aggressive warrior race, and the women are also like contributors to the military strength, like why is it that you're presenting the women of that race as if they couldn't quite bear the sheer weight of the pauldrons infamously in World of Warcraft, right?
Yeah, it's the thing of like this sexual dimorphism that insists on the woman being smaller, which when you look at nature, it's like, no, it's like majority of the time the woman is bigger, actually. But anytime it's sexual dimorphism when it relates to a humanoid character, well, it's the women's got to be smaller, got to be little, tiny women, itty-bitty ones, smaller than the man, so the man does not feel threatened.
Like you take a wild boar, you take a female wild boar, the sheer size that they get up to, and you wonder why doesn't that necessarily apply to the orcs, right? Like they should be a little more on the monster side than on the girl side, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it is frustrating, and it's like one of my consistent frustrations with especially Blizzard's character design is that they also codified a lot of this, especially for video games. Like, when you look at like, all of League of Legends aesthetic ultimately comes from Warcraft 3, after all. Like, that's the starting point for League of Legends. And so, like, Blizzard especially are responsible for, like, codifying a lot of that particular style of Monster Girl when it comes to, like, Western gaming fantasy art. So I blame them fully for everything.
Yes, completely their fault. Boo, shame. I mean, eventually they did get better. I don't think you can actually confuse a Pandaren female silhouette for any other race in the game. Yeah. But like, that's definitely lessons learned after a lot of pushback and a lot of like kicking and screaming and gnashing of teeth while they're being dragged into a new century. But yeah, it took a long time to get to that point. And it really shouldn't. Like, ultimately, of course, what we know from the industry is that a lot of it tends to be like top-down, like art directorial dictation to their staff. Like, there are enough freaky artists of both of our acquaintances that we know that if you're given them an assignment to make as monstrous a girl as possible, it would barely be recognized as having human origin. Yeah. So it's definitely more like conventionality and like the limitations of imagination given a corporate setting, rather than like merely that a lot of professional artists have limitations in their imagination.
Yeah, I know for a fact at Riot, and this is some years ago, it's not recent at all, but I know for a fact at Riot that during the character design of at least one monstrous, monster-adjacent female character, there was an executive who was like in a meeting saying, but does she pass the fuckability test?
Yeah.
Like that's the kind of rhetoric that's like pretty open at certain game companies. I don't know about if it's like, I think maybe the executives at Riot at this point have learned not to say shit like that out loud. But
yeah, at least amongst people that they think might speak to the press.
Yeah. But that's the kind of rhetoric that's still pretty damn common. And like this is also stuff we hear from like from inside Ubisoft. Like where executives are pretty damn open about like if they need to be girls need to be fuckable, like if that's their first responsibility as character designs, they need to be hot, and then everything else has to be subordinated into hotness, which is again a pity because like yes, hot ladies nice. I think Lushen and I both agree hot ladies are great and it's wonderful to have them around, but we could also have like things that are not designed just to be that.
Okay, so this is the part where I might be exposed to Fergie here, but are they actually hot enough in some instances? Like, let's push it to the other extreme. Let's push it to what TikTok calls the monster fucker demographic.
Oh yeah.
In a lot of cases, when they design hot women designed to be fuckable, I don't think they actually appreciate like just what extent there is to human sexuality, like what people might actually find attractive, even to like monstrous extremes. Like their succubus designs are conventional succubus designs. Like if you want to actually get the monster fucker demographic, you have to really dial up the nasty sometimes.
Yeah, that's the other thing is like for all that like a lot of monster girl designs are designed to be like sort of overtly horny, they're always kind of a sort of safe Disney Channel style horny to me. I feel like it's like it's horny, but it's not like it's not dirty, it's not kinky, it's not really filthy. It's just there are breasts here and also curves, but anything that sort of slides into transgressive sexuality of any kind is really kind of excised, and I get there's Evelyn from League of Legends being a perfect example of that, of course, being like this sexual pain demon who tempts her victims with like the promises of their darkest, most dangerous, illicit fantasies coming true. And what does she look like? A hot girl.
She looks like a Sports Illustrated model.
Yeah, like a fairly standard hot babe, which is like, no, if you promise people like their darkest, most perverse, forbidden fantasies that they dare not voice to others, like I feel like she'd look a little bit more out there a lot of the time, which again, like she needs at least like a male version of her. Anyway, that's the League of Legends block. That's for later. I'm jumping ahead.
Yeah, I think of the Blizzard block, Kerrigan probably comes closest, but she's still too conventionally designed, right?
Yeah.
Like she's obviously just an aesthetic applied to a conventional model rather than exploration of what sensuality means at that extreme.
Yeah, I mean, because that would be an interesting idea. Because, like, as we see the pictures she has right there, that's the thing that gets me is like she has like long spiky heels. And what I would have found more interesting is if like, okay, but what's horny to the Zerg, right? This hive mind sort of gestalt entity species that lays eggs and shit. Like, what is horny to them? Like, what kind of like if they were designing someone to be like the very avatar of sexuality, what would that look like? Because it would probably be very different and interesting. Not necessarily sexy to us. That would be kind of the point. But interesting.
Yeah, and especially with the Zerg. Canonically speaking, question isn't what do they find horny, but what do they not? Because they are an assimilationist species. They will take everything. So why shouldn't their leader represent that?
Yeah. Someone in chat mentioned, hang on, I couldn't find it. Where are you? Oh yeah, Moontoot says, we use human sexual dimorphism because it's easier to think of in terms of what works, what will look appealing to humans. Our brains are hardwired to look for human traits. Yes, this is absolutely true. The argument we're making here isn't that you shouldn't do that ever, but that the concept of monster girls, like the power of a monster character as a whole, but especially specifically gendered monster girls, monster men, or hell, monster non-binary people, is that you can go beyond the human and explore like things that lay outside of just like what's baseline attracted to everyone, which is, again, trust me, I'm gonna get into this once we get to Riot. Trust me.
Yeah. Yep. There's also a case where we're not actually sure where the limits are for human attraction. There are plenty of Cthulhu fuckers out there to lay evidence to the fact that just because it doesn't look human, and just because it only like vaguely alludes to human traits, doesn't keep people from being disturbingly attracted to that.
Yeah, disturbingly and sort of charmingly, frankly. Because like I know, especially in like LGBT communities, that like attraction to the monstrous and the other has a long history that like goes back a very long time. Partly because like when society calls you a monster for loving who you love, it's not. I don't think it's like psychologically that outside of the norm. If you go, well, okay, then I like if I have to think of myself as a monster, then what like could I find happiness in the monstrous then, rather than, you know, it's like it has a long history, and I do feel like sometimes when I see like sort of mainstream, air quotes, monster girls that are just like, this is the hot lady who's hot to stereotypical straight guy number 500, but with a few monster parts attached to it. It does feel a little bit like it kind of misses the history of the thing as being deeply entwined with like both kink communities, but also the LGBTQ community.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, human beings have a tendency to empathize with and find traces of themselves in even things as inhuman and as unliving as rocks and rock formations. So, quite frankly, finding that limitation is a challenge that people have happily taken on and have happily failed to actually find a horizon for.
Yeah. Dragonzilla says in chat, speaking as a queer, we're attracted to the monstrous because the monstrous is liberating, the monster is powerful. This is also true, I think. Like that there is a tremendous power in being the monster.
And even if the monster himself isn't like represented as powerful necessarily, they are at least represented as far distant from the conventionality that's otherwise oppressive.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. And like the Blizzard examples, especially, like as I said, Kerrigan gets really, really close. I think whoever was like designing for the Zerg faction, how they would intermix with human beings was along the right direction, but they just weren't allowed to be pushed far enough.
Yeah, that or like it was technical limitations at the time, because like Kerrigan's design certainly for the original StarCraft was limited by what could Blizzard actually render in cinematic back then, which was pretty limited. Like this was like the late 90s, and Blizzard were good, but there were some pretty hard limitations. I know this like certainly this influenced like the design of games like Diablo, where they used 3D models to create the sprites, but because they could only model so much, like they couldn't really create as elaborate 3D models as they wanted to back then. I remember reading developer interviews about that, which didn't stop them from like having succubuses who all look exactly like the same body type as Kerrigan, basically running around in hell in that game, rather than something more monstrous and interesting. Anyway, treading old ground there.
Yeah, although would say that that's not enough an excuse for them, because especially with their oldest games, back when like game manuals, this might be too far in the past for some of the audience, but game manuals used to come with a whole bunch of illustrations of like how the characters were designed long before they were actually implemented in the game, right? So you would get like Space Marines that look right out of like Warhammer 40K, just because like there was no graphical limitations except for what the pen can contribute. And that still applied to the female character designs long before they were implemented. And it was still relatively conventional. Again, I think they've gone a lot better than that. The Diablo 4 trailers, especially with the blood veil like drifting down upon the newest villain, was visually very impressive, and the design was awesome for that. Like just a sheer stark contrast between the white and the red blood. You know, for how what was her name?
Something. She has a name. It's the Diablo 4 villain, who's presumably going to transform into Diablo by the end of the game somehow.
Yeah. And that, I would say, is a good example of using the human fundamental basis as a way to horrify as well as attract, right? Like, it's obviously a very conventional human female body design, but they push it far enough in the gore and the horror aspects of it to give it not just a monstrous quality, but like a horrifying quality that you otherwise wouldn't get.
Yeah, that is a pretty cool design, actually. I think it's Lilith.
Yes, Yes, Liv, because she was supposed to be Adam's counterpart.
Let me see. See, I think I can find her design here somewhere. Oh yeah, there it is. There it is. There it is. Just give me a second, and I'll have it up on screen, I believe. Yeah, or let's go. Come on, God damn it, it's WebP. God, there's this image format that websites have started using called WebP or web publishing or whatever, and it's fucking annoying because it doesn't work with anything.
Yeah, you usually have to convert it back to JPEG or GIF. It's irritating as hell.
Incredibly annoying. Okay, let me see if I can get my program to open it. It should be able to. Nope. It doesn't want to. Fuck off. Okay. Right, talk amongst yourselves. Now I'm stubborn. Now it's fucking gonna get this shit up on screen. Fuck you.
Let's see.
There we go. Convert it.
Perfect. Yes, that's the one I just found as well.
There she is. Yeah, and Lilith is a pretty damn cool design because you can still see sort of the hourglass shape, sort of the bust there, but the translucency is like the thing that makes her like that makes it scary, that makes it sort of off-putting and weird, in a really cool way. Like just the concept of this long veil of skin. Ooh, scary, very cool.
It's not just the veil behind her, but the fact that the veil is made to look as if it's integrated into part of her body.
Yeah.
And her body itself is just basically a translucent parody of a living thing, right? This is closer to having to knowing that what before you might look like an attractive woman was actually just an anglerfish about to bite down on you.
Yeah.
Which is, a mocking parody of life. It's exactly what you want from a demon design.
Yeah, like that's the other thing is the monster character at their best. I think they pass some sort of commentary on humanity, like in terms of how they're thematically applied, and like with Lilith specifically, like the translucency. Really, it like she looks kind of fragile, right? Like she looks kind of like, oh shit, like the heart is right there. You could reach out and poke it, basically. And there's this sort of perverse tension between looking tremendously vulnerable and kind of fragile, but then also you see those giant horns and that scary ass face, and you kind of go, oh, maybe don't want to mess with that. And that's the thing I like is like when you have a monster design that makes you kind of feel weird about your own body, like that kind of makes you feel weird in yourself. There's a vulnerability to that, to being having your fear exposed like that.
And the otherworldliness of having the sheer organic presence of the cloak behind her, that the veins behind it especially makes it so that it looks as if even if you can injure her, you're injuring only like a tiny part of the entire possibly carnivorous whole.
Yeah, it makes her look huge. That's also the other thing. It's a very cool design, and I don't know how Blizzard are going to use her in Diablo 4. I don't have high hopes for them because they're so bad at female characters. Like, writing them?
Yeah.
Man, I remember the StarCraft 2 campaign, the first time I played, the Legacy of the Void, the Cirque campaign in StarCraft 2. Like, Kerrigan, spends the entire fucking game, it's like, Jim Raynor, gotta get to Jim, Jimmy. Everything for her is, about him and his approval and saving him and being loved by him. Up until, the very, very end where they finally decide, oh, no, wait, actually, maybe she should have an independent character.
Yeah, the less said about that era of Blizzard's writing, the better. I think they might have started improving with the Overwatch crew, but...
Yeah, I think it's just that there was a very different writing aesthetic for the StarCraft games than Overwatch. Like, Overwatch was explicitly created, to be this Rainbow Coalition progressive, sort of, at least certainly in the marketing. And they succeeded at that broadly. But they were aiming for that sort of progressive Rainbow Coalition thing, where StarCraft has always been a little bit more the traditionalist, sort of typical gamer. The game that invented esports, Blizzard likes to say.
They were ultimately basically just Warhammer 40k with the serial numbers found off in the first place. So a lot of the conventionalities of storytelling from that overall direction was still pretty much preserved all the way to present day. Peter R., you're right. StarCraft 1 was pretty good overall. We're mostly criticizing how StarCraft 2 handled ultimately the interpersonal narratives between, especially between its love interests. That just kind of fell apart.
Yeah,
Like,
I was very
StarCraft 1's
disappointed. Like,
betrayal, especially.
yeah, because Brood War was fantastic in terms of writing Kerrigan as a compelling villain, as someone who's who has her own interests and who pursues them, and like who clearly still has some affection for Jim Raynor, but is not like, it's not her whole goddamn personality. Her whole personality is like securing freedom and power for herself, which made her a compelling villain. And then in the StarCraft campaign, it's like it just couldn't get away from she's Jim Raynor's girlfriend. Which, like, to me, that always felt more like Jim was the guy constantly chasing after Kerrigan because he has this massive guilt complex about her, which is, like, compelling as a character trait. But then they just take that guilt complex and, like, now Kerrigan has it too, but in the other direction. Which I found very kind of tedious.
It was. I mean, obviously, the writing teams between the two games are completely different in the first place. I'm pretty sure, I might be recollecting this inaccurately, but I'm pretty sure the original writers had left Blizzard before then.
Yeah.
Part of the first hints of the Blizzard exodus that eventually like culminated in like this year with their mass firings. But long before then, the creative staff already had a huge amount of turnover.
Yeah, I mean, Blizzard is an unusual company in that they're one of the few gaming companies that actually could keep people for like 20 years, but only a very small number of them.
Yeah, actually, no, I think quite a few of them actually did manage to stay past a certain point. But the exodus definitely seemed to have started around the StarCraft 2 era.
Yeah, and we're sort of seeing the consequences of it now, like with the mess that was the Warcraft 3 launch, like the remaster thing, and like you can kind of see that a lot of the people who sort of held the line for that sort of Blizzard polish that they were famous for have kind of been shuffled out of the company slowly by Activision over time.
Yeah, unfortunately. Now, obviously, the Warcraft 3's remastered was done by an external company.
Yeah, who got fucked by Blizzard. Yeah.
Nobody came out of that looking good, but definitely not the executive decision-making level. That was just terrible. But yeah, overall, Blizzard's design has gone better overall, but they have, not only do they still have a lot of room to improve, they're starting not from 0, but from like -5 in terms of like proper creative representation, like taking advantage of the medium and the format available to Monster Girls in general.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. And like I said, the reason we started with them is because they codified so much of what Monster Girl design eventually became in games like League of Legends. Oh, hey, Kayle and Morgana are there, which allows us to relitigate the question of, like, what the hell is a Monster Girl these days? Because it used to be, for example, there's a lot of people who say Lady Dimitrescu are not, Lady D is not really a Monster Girl, because she just looks like a normal-ass woman who happens to be a vampire and has knife hands. I believe she transforms later in the game into a big monster that you fight in the boss fight, but there is this question, like, what constitutes a Monster Girl now? Callista, who is just, she's just a ghost, like spiky fingers, but she is just a ghost. Does that count in like the discourse as a Monster Girl anymore?
I mean, yeah, at least to my reckoning. Trying to gatekeep the concept of Monster Girls kind of takes away a lot of creativity available to the topic in the first place. But ultimately, like, just because they look conventionally human doesn't mean that how they're designed doesn't have elements that we would consider like deliberately monstrous, right? Especially on the deliberate part. If the artist's representation was to present them as a feminine threat, or at least like a feminine, like otherworldly or abnormal characteristic, that I think there's some argument to be made that being too tight on the definition of what constitutes a Monster Girl makes it so that we can't talk about the subject at all.
Yeah,
Lady D, I'm sure we'll be coming back to with plenty of anecdotes about specifically what makes her so monstrous and what makes her so compelling as a Monster Girl, other than the fact that she's a giant woman.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah,
because like giants unambiguously used to be monsters. Like,
oh yeah, absolutely,
unambiguously. But nowadays, it's like a lot of people probably wouldn't see them that way. There's just woman but big. But it used to be monstrous. Like just the simple fact of being larger than people would expect you to be was enough to make you a monster. And you can see that in characters like, for example, like the OG monster, Frankenstein's monster, the creature, whose monstrousness in film and visual media always has been portrayed as him large, him big man. Like, he's always portrayed as larger, more lumbering, more swollen and big than the other humans around him. That's part of what makes him scary as a monster on visual terms, even though in terms of what Mary Shelley wrote back in the day, he wasn't really identified with being large. He was just like kind of ugly because he was sewn together from corpses.
Yeah, and ultimately it's a matter of utility, right? And what makes them Monster Girl is supposed to be the non-human aspects being presented. So ultimately, if they're just basically a cute girl with cat ears and they're acting cute, there's not a whole lot of attention drawn to the fact that they're a cat girl. I kind of feel that that's just a character trait rather than monster trait, right? But you see with Lady D, you especially see with League of Legends characters, the purpose behind the design aesthetic for a lot of these isn't just like to be cute, but to be non-human, to exaggerate a certain trait that contrasts them with more conventional, more human characters.
Yeah, and like League of Legends... Go ahead.
Yeah, with some trepidation about how they approach Evelyn, of course, because frankly, I don't think they went far enough with Evelyn.
Yeah, and like we said, like League of Legends has its inheritance from Warcraft. Like, it has its inheritance from Blizzard. And like a lot of what League of Legends does, and a lot of what they probably always will do, it begins with the particular fantasy aesthetic that's advanced by Blizzard, which in turn takes a lot of inspiration from the fantasy aesthetic that's advanced by things like Warhammer 40k, which in turn takes a lot of its inspiration from like 1950s and 60s pulp novels and like Conan the Barbarian and like the fantasy comics that Marvel once upon a time put out in like Marvel and DC and a lot of other comic companies used to put out in droves. Like, there is this long line going back through monster designs all the way back to like your Robert Heinlein's, like with Starship Troopers and the heck's his name, the guy who wrote Conan the Barbarian.
So tip of my tongue, but I forgot.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I fully understand what you mean. And yeah, honestly, I think we might have actually taken a step back, at least during the early 2000s, in terms of representation there, right? Because Warhammer's representation of females could either go from like pretty standard battle nuns to like the Dark Eldar females, which are cadaverous in design and honestly kind of freaky. That would be a pretty good example of what I think we would consider a pretty good Monster Girl design these days, compared to what ultimately you got from Blizzard toning things down for a more vanilla audience.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at some Dark Eldar designs on Google right now. No surprise, Google search results is just all titty all the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do remember like certainly the old Dark Eldar models from like when I was a kid. Like, there were a lot of monsters, like both there and among Chaos. Like, they weren't scared to make the monster women very monstrous indeed.
Yeah, the emphasis there was how separate they are from what we considered human, whereas the human models are, well, tits and ass and a lot of leg.
Yeah, Lord of Koreshvel points out something League does is keep facial features almost entirely human, no matter the body. Yeah, that's definitely specifically a League of Legends thing. Like, you could also see that in Blizzard, like that, especially the female faces were always like more human than the male ones. But League of Legends has this thing of like, no, the face is like sacrosanct. You cannot have like a face that's marred by anything. Like, not even scars. Like, this is something I've talked about endlessly with Samira and like characters like that. Like the warrior women of League of Legends are just not allowed to ever have scars on their faces, but the monster women are never allowed to look anything but human in their faces ever. Which again comes back to this sexual dimorphism thing where the monster men are often allowed to be far more out there in terms of their physical design, but there's this sexual dimorphism thing where no, but woman has to be feminine, traditional feminine.
Yeah, the men are allowed to have fur, to have much larger tusks. Even with the most recent like org examples, the female characters still have much smaller tusk designs than you would see amongst male counterparts. Although I think that actually might be reversed if they were actually like supposed to be like boars. Yeah, I will have to double check on that. But like, you compare Rumble, for instance, with any of the female examples amongst the Yordles in League of Legends. Like, they're supposed to be like, if I recall correctly, the blue small characters were technically supposed to be a different species early on in League of Legends history until they just
Tristana was originally supposed to be a Megling. which was a sort of
Right.
goblin creature that Riot sort of they sort of half-heartedly invented them for like 10 seconds, and then they immediately retconned them into, no, everyone's Yordles. But yeah, there's this thing of like Tristana became essentially the model from which Tristana and Poppy became the model from which other female Yordles were drawn, and they were originally not supposed, as far as I remember, to be actual Yordles, and actual Yordles were supposed to be people like Rumble, like Heimerdinger, and indeed Ziggs, who ended up these little fuzzy furry goblins, which is one of the big sexual dimorphisms you can still see in League of Legends, is specifically that thing of the Yordle dudes, all fuzzballs. Like you've got your Heimerdingers, who's just made of fur. You've got Rumble. You've got Kled, who's like this big fussy old grandpa looking Yosemite Sam motherfricker. And then you get like Tristana and Poppy, and it's like they've in modern incarnations they've been retconned to sort of have fuzzy fur around the edges, but they're like, oh, what? No furry? No, just girl, no furry.
Yeah, that's a conventional hairstyle. That's conventional skin tone. Well, not tone, but skin texture. Compared to what you see amongst the male Yordle cast, that's not Vhagar, because Vhagar we don't see properly, at least. But yeah, obviously the consolidation blurred things a little more. But the modern treatment of Yordles, even like newer Yordle characters, like, well, Lulu's not exactly new, but Lulu still falls within that design principle, right? The most you'll see is a little bit of fuzzy around their ears, but that's basically it. Like, they're still made to be ultimately pretty conventional in terms like how you're supposed to see femininity amongst League of Legends characters.
Yeah. Which is a pity, because again, like little tiny goblin creatures, you can do a lot of more interesting things with that. Like when you're already messing around with proportions so much, you can do more interesting things with it, I feel like. And that's that's sort of my permanent frustration with like female lead characters is this. And Riot, okay, so let's bring up this fucking blog post that Riot put out recently. It's from Riot Reeve, who is one of the leads on, I think, skins and character creation at League of Legends, one of the lead champions, visual something. And basically the blog post he put out, I commend it for being honest, but basically what he said is that League of Legends, like, they categorize now characters into 3 categories, like human, humanoid, and that would be, like, humans, obviously. Humanoid would be something like Zaya, Rakan, but certainly also Lilia, and then actual monsters, which would be something like Rek'Sai. And by the way, note about Rek'Sai, she's not a monster girl. I'm sorry, she's not. She's a monster who happens to be female, but she's not sentient. She can't. She's like, it's like calling a dog a monster girl. It's not. It's not. I'm sorry. I know a lot of you love her, and she's wonderful, but that's where I draw the line on what's considered a monster girl. Like, they have to have the capacity for sentience at the very least. They should not be mindless void monsters endlessly consuming flesh for the purposes of like. They should be sentient at the very least. Like, they should be a person.
There should be at least like 1 or 2 vaguely humanoid characteristics, other than the fact that they are like bipedal and have a spine. Like, that's a little too minimized.
Yeah, as someone says in chat, are xenomorphs monster girls? No. But like, that doesn't mean, like, they're not monster girls, but they are still, like, especially when you talk about Xenomorph Queen, they can she especially is like a representation of like the monstrous feminine, which is not entirely the same thing. She's a kind of sort of feminine breeding instinct as literal monster, and the Alien movies are like rich with allegories about like female identity and like the ways that femininity is treated as an other. But no, she's not a monster girl. She's a monster who is a girl, but not quite the same thing, at least not in my estimation.
Geiger especially pushes the envelope on what the discussion would be about monster girls in the first place, and in a good direction, I think. Like, the creativity expressed in the Alien movies especially makes you question a lot of things about fundamental principles about how you view these things. But also,
Martin's in chat, good one, Diogenes, look, a monster girl.
Yes, exactly.
Alex Shiraji, have you seen Xenomorph porn? Yeah, just because Rule 34 draws Rule 34 absolutely makes monster girl porn of Xenomorph girls, but they specifically like change the character design and the characteristics of the thing to make it a monster girl.
Yeah. They, if anything, make the xenomorph basic figure significantly more vanilla in order to meet the demands of fetishists.
Yeah, usually.
Yeah.
It is the thing is like not all monster porn that features female monsters is monster girl porn, you know.
Yeah.
This implies Skyne has seen it. I've been on the internet since the 90s, CS Dragon. I have seen everything. Everything.
I'll neither confirm nor deny a similar exposure to the depths of the darkness that is Rule 34.
Right.
Anyhow.
Anyhow, moving on. So, like, the images you see flashing up on screen, there's mostly from League of Legends splash arts, but also Legends of Runeterra art. And Legends of Runeterra generally has been a lot better about creating more interesting and, like, and varied and diverse female characters than League of Legends proper, which tends to very much, like, as if you follow my channels, you already know all of my complaints about it, but, like, League of Legends proper has a tendency to, as the fucking blog post that I was trying to talk about, Riot Reeve, talking about how they classify monsters in like, characters in 3 groups: monsters, actual monsters, literal monsters, your rec size, and so on, to humanoids, which are the Yordles, which are characters like Saya and Rakan, and so on, and then actual humans. And he says that the reason why they prioritize things the way they do is because they have found with their data, because Riot is a very data-driven company, don't you know? They have found with their data that attractive characters, like, that are conventionally attractive are sort of more engaging. People engage with them more. And I'm not going to quibble with that at all. Like, I think he's telling the absolute truth that their data says so. But the quibble that I have about that is, like, yeah, but every time you put out another conventionally attractive character, they're competing with every other conventional attractive character for that attention from people who are into conventionally attractive characters. Like, it bothers me a lot that the argument that he used, that Riot likes to use against doing greater design diversity is this thing of, like, well, people engage with the thing that's designed to appeal to the lowest common denominator more. Like, yeah, no shit, they do. Of course they do. Like, yes, you pander to the lowest common denominator, of course that gets more engagement. But it's not about having every single goddamn champion be maximum engaging. It's about having a diversity of things so that lots of people can find the thing that they want from the goddamn thing, which transitions us into the way that they tend to design monster girls, which is, again, every goddamn monster girl is designed to be sexy in this game. Lilia is designed, well, maybe not sexy, but she's certainly designed to be attractive, cute, like, very appealing. Senna, who's an undead wraith who escaped from the depths of, like, a deranged, like, monster creature's lantern where she was tortured for decades. It's just a unmarred hot lady who occasionally glows a little bit. Like, you could have done, there's so many more interesting things that you can do with all of these characters to make them more different, more strange, more, like, again, the power of the monster girl design is to go beyond that which is human, beyond that which is conventional, beyond that which is, like, broadly, generally appealing to everyone regardless of demographic.
And Shady Kridara also brought up that Callista's ultimately a better Senna design, which ultimately was what I was actually going to say as you were talking about Senna. Actually, ultimately, when you're talking about, like, wraith characters, the Spirit Woman is honestly a better take on it because she looks like a cadaver. She looks like she's dead.
Yeah.
She looks like she's a dried up husk reanimated through sheer rage and will and vengeance. Like, in terms of, like, designing ghostly characters, especially ghostly monster girls, this is honestly overall a pretty good take.
Yeah, and that's the other thing is, like, Legends of Runeterra generally has some better ones. Actually, let me see if I can find the specific one I'm talking about. The Wraith Caller. I quite like this as a monstrous female ghost character design, specifically because of, like, that hood that's pulled down over her face. And, like, the sort of the straps and restraints, it all implies something rather terrible about what lies underneath, but there is this denial of being shown, which is the thing that I find is often scary about ghosts, is this thing of, like, you don't quite know what you're dealing with. Like, when a ghost is scary, it's like when you think you see a fuzzy figure in the distance, and it moves like it's a person, but you're not sure what the hell's going. Like when you have that uncertainty, that denial of information, that's, I think, when ghost characters get really kind of compelling. When you're also left to imagine some of the monstrosity that lies beneath.
Yeah. And both points of they're animated in such a way that their movements are unnatural. Like if this particular character was animated specifically, you would probably be seeing the head tilted and like jerking at unnatural angles as it approaches you with limbs like operating as if they were with a broken clockwork, right?
Yeah. And it's like, I'm not saying Senna should have a white hood over her head, by the way. That's no. But what I'm saying is, like, for a character like Senna, having some, like someone mentioned in chat, like if Senna had like a big crack right across her face where like ghostly energy is peeking out of, like that to me is like, oh shit, yeah, because she's putting on a facade. Yes. Like that would be interesting that she's putting on the facade of greater humanity that she has. Why is she doing it? For her husband, who probably would prefer not to have to hunt her as an undead, you know? Like, there's all these little things you can do to make a otherwise human character uncanny that, to me, would make them much more compelling as monster characters.
Yeah. Chat does bring up whether or not Senna should count as a monster girl, and if she is, and whether or not she should count because she's supposed to be alive again, right? But
well,
like,
she's alive and dead.
Eyes,
she's supposed to be a sort of unique type of undead, as far as I remember the lore. Like, she is not fully alive, but she's not fully dead either.
The concept for Senna especially is to be a liminal character in concept, hovering between the territories of the living and the dead. But all you see reflected in that is the fact that she's a living black woman with a huge ass gun and glowing green eyes, which means that in terms of matching the character to the concept, there's a huge amount of missed opportunity that just hasn't been touched upon at all, to the point that you miss the fact that she's supposed to be liminal in the first place. That's just, she's supposed to be basically almost a psychopath.
Yeah. Oh, someone sent a super chat to ask, should Gwen classify as a monster girl? She clearly could fit, but right now she just feels like a girl with big scissors. Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of thing, I kind of debated whether to bring Gwen's splash art up here, because it's kind of the same problem as with Senna, where it's like, theoretically, there's a monster concept in there. Like, Senna could be a monster girl. I would argue that she's not. Like, she's not designed to be one, because they don't incorporate any of the traits of monsterhood. Like, they visually, in terms of how they design her, they don't make her look not human at all. And Gwen has kind of the same, well, debatable whether you think it's a problem or not, but as a monster girl, she's not designed to have any monstrous traits. Like, they're just not there at all. Which is the thing that's like, if you just look at her, you're like, oh, it's a human. It's a human person, slightly weird human person, but just a human person. Same thing with Kaisa, which has been my consistent complaint with her for like the past 250 million years. Is that, I'm about to get into.
You know my take on Kaisa. Elsewhere in an alternative life, I've definitely written a lot about Kaisa and how she's failed as a character fundamentally, as a void character fundamentally. Because there's no distinguishing Kaisa from basically a Sports Illustrated model during one of the swimsuit editions, right? Yeah. Like, fundamentally, all she is a woman in a skin-tight suit with giant floating pauldrons.
Yeah, and that's the thing that's so, because Venom is definitely a monster character. Like, when you think about, like, Venom from Spider-Man, he's a monster character as surely as a werewolf is, in the sense that he can look normal, he can look like an ordinary human, but then there is this inner monster that can come out and take over and make him this raging Hulk with giant teeth and a huge tongue. And Kaisa is like, she's very much like 90% of a Venom concept for League of Legends, in that she's bonded with a void symbiote that gives her special powers that she can put it on like a suit, essentially. But they just kind of fall at that final hurdle of making the monster version of her should be at least scary. Like, when she puts on the helmet and like the suit is in full power mode, she should at least look scary and not just like a cool person in a suit.
Yeah. Ultimately, what we can like pinpoint with the Kaisa failures of design is that take all of the like visual like symbolism for what a void creature is, right? Take all like the sinewy tendons and the muscles and the claws and the fangs, and point out to me where that actually is on Kaisa. Once you remove the pauldrons, which takes up like 90% of the void symbology, all you're really left is with purple and gray and black, and not even like a distinctively void purple, because what you see, especially with her splash art, is that she's not holding like like fanged emitters, like spitting out venom and poison in every direction, right? You see purple crystals, which isn't something that's flagged as void in any sense, except for maybe like Malazar.
Yeah, and even Malzahar doesn't really have it. Like,
oh, Malzahar, yeah.
Yeah.
Whoops. But yeah, like fundamentally, what we're looking at here is like purple, like a girl in a bodysuit with purple crystals. You're left asking, where are the fangs? Where are the tendons I usually see with these monstrous archetypes? Where are like the cancerous monstrous growth that you see coming out of Cho'Gath or anybody else, or even like the chitin plating you see on Kog'Maw, which.
Yeah.
Okay, Kog'Maw has some issues because I'm not sure you're supposed to see chitin plating was ultimately a really squishy carry, but you get the point, right?
Yeah, Kog'Maw is a weird one because he's one of those old Void champions, like Cho'Gath from long before they knew what the hell the Void was supposed to be. But yeah, and it is the thing. Like I think for me fundamentally, when it comes to monster girls, like it's something about them has to be in some way transgressive. Like, not massively, but like something about them has to transgress humanity at the very least.
Yeah.
Which is why I wouldn't say like an anime cat girl is necessarily a monster girl. Like, not necessarily not a monster girl, but not necessarily a monster girl. If it's just a person wearing cat ears who says "nya," versus something like what's the lady from Outlaw Star?
Oh, geez, I haven't seen that movie. I haven't seen a series in forever.
Yeah, it's, sorry.
I get what you mean, though. But basically, a girl with cat ears.
Aisha Clan. Like, she would classify to me more as a monster girl because there's something transgressive about her. Like, there's something transgressive about like her behavior, about the ways that she expresses her species, as it were.
Yeah. Identifiably sort of human, but outside of humanity. Like it overlaps rather than like there's a Venn diagram rather than just a circle.
Yeah, that's at least for me, that's the thing, is like something has to be outside of humanity. And again with Kai'Sa and other characters like Xayah, for example, it just isn't there. Like Xayah, in case you don't know, she does have bird feet. Like, she does have claws at the end. Like, she has digitigrade feet and bird claws at the end of them. So does Rakan. But it's like, it's sort of barely there. Like, because a lot of people, like I saw in chat, when people saw Xayah flash up on screen while we were talking, it was like, Xayah is a monster girl? And like, yeah, I agree. It's like, it seems like she's designed very far away from being that, which for me, especially with Xayah and Rakan, is disappointing because they're meant to be birds of paradise. And the whole concept of the birds of paradise, what's fascinating about them as a subgroup, as a group of species, is that with the birds of paradise, the males are the ones that put on the big, bright, fancy display, and the females all kind of look really dull and like really kind of downplayed and not very interesting. And you can sort of see where they're going with that with Xayah and Rakan, with Xayah is like sort of the gothy girl, like who's much more dark and dour in her coloring, and then Rakan is the big flashy show-off idiot himbo boyfriend who like runs around and shouts and dances. But like, if your whole point was that Rakan is the fancy, flashy, show-off, attractive one who's constantly trying to make himself look good, then if you want to make the contrast with that, you can't also just have Xayah be the hot one. Like, if Rakan is meant to be the hot one in their sort of weird odd couple dynamic, then Xayah can't also be the hot one. She has to be something else, which is where, make her a harpy. Like, make her an actual scary bird woman-looking creature, a harpy, an actual one, rather than just his hot girlfriend who is also hot.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure, at least in their case, the design was top down, right? They took the concept of wanting to have a parody of a stereotypical scene couple, and then try to build the lore around that, rather than like figuring out like what it actually means for these two characters to be in the universe as they are. But you know, fair. Sometimes you just want to make a parody, but it's still a missed opportunity. And like, for the purpose of discussion, she still fundamentally isn't that interesting as a monster girl. As a satirical take on a certain like personality archetype, sure, we can argue that. But in terms of like integrating her into the universe and everything, still a couple of missed points. She shouldn't be having a whole lot of red coloration, for instance, because that just shows up really, really easily in the background.
Yeah.
Like, if we're talking about specifically the archetype of having like the female of the species being bit more of a stealth character. She's still a little too flashy in terms of like how she operates and how she hunts.
Yeah.
And also not avian enough. She, like, when I saw these characters in the first place, except for the wings, I thought they were some kind of bird fox hybrid.
Yeah. Yeah, especially with the ears. Like, that's the thing that makes her look so much like Ari. Like, it's ridiculous when you match up their faces next to each other, how much she just looks like Ari in a different costume.
Yeah, I mean, given that Ari's it was a recent event, Sakura style design, the Japanese style event with the axle especially. Like,
yeah,
Ari
Spirit
also
Blossom
has the pink colorations, the really pointy, fluffy ears, everything else. So there's a lot of overlap in how they're designing the stallion females, and I'm sure is necessarily good for the long-term design strategy for that particular cast of characters.
Yeah, this would be Spirit Blossom Ari, and you can see like the ears are functionally identical to the ones that Zaya has in terms of their physical expression, which I like. And speaking of Ari, by the way, she is definitely a monster girl, specifically because she is the Kitsune. Which, in as far as I remember, my sort of East Asian general mythology about like fox creatures is the point of them is that they are a kind of reverse were creature where they can transform into humans, but they're actually foxes.
Oh, specifically not Kitsune actually, but the Korean thing, the Gumiho. Given that she has slightly vampiric tendencies as well. Yeah. The Kitsune are mostly, if I recall the lore right, because this is not my background culture, but the Kitsune are supposed to mostly be tricksters, although they've had like magical conflicts and such. The mythology involving them like taking in souls and draining energy from people falls more on the Korean side, where the Kumiho are decidedly more predatory in function.
Yeah.
Although, obviously, Riot being Riot, and given how Ionia is basically every single Asian culture lumped together and boiled into like one singular muck, she's both. Let's be honest, she's supposed to be both.
Yeah.
The intention might be more Kumiho than Kitsune, but let's be honest, there are a bunch of weebs in there, and there are a bunch of non-Asian weebs. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Ionia is very much like, it's just, here is all of Asia, except some parts of Asia which we don't think of as Asia, like which kind of bothers me, because that's one thing. Like in the Freljord, you can find characters that are inspired by sort of plains people, like the Mongolian steppe people and like people from like certain areas of Russia, who like ride around on Elnuks and stuff in the Freljord. But then but Mongolia is in Asia, though, so shouldn't they be a part of Ionia if that's the thing that you're doing? But just like the way that Riot sort of codes culture into regions is like, because we have 3 regions set in Europe, and then every other continent is like one country.
Well, Ionia tends to be portrayed somewhat patronizingly, I feel, as some kind of like material paradise, right?
Yeah.
Like you see a lot of lush trees, a lot of like visages that are like mystical and fancy and highly Japanese coded. Whereas Mongolia falls outside of that general domain. Mm-hmm. Like we can say that it's supposed to be Pan-Asia, but in execution, it's a weeb paradise.
Yeah,
so
it's very much
a lot of stereotypes are not just Japanese, but specifically like the Kanto region of Japan, right? Like we're talking about like Tokyo bias in the local region. We don't get like a lot of Hokkaido influence with a heavy snow and Ainu influence. In fact, we don't see any Ainu influence at all, really, honestly. And like none of the like really like southern tropical. No, we do. No, I'll be mistaken on that. We do get some tropical influences from the early designs for Karma. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, Karma has been it's been reworked into being like, I think, the only Southeast Asian representation in the game. I think.
Yeah.
Like technically, Nidalee, I guess, would count as subcontinental Indian representation, but it's another can of worms.
I mean, the standard and really traditional defense for these kind of decisions is that they're not supposed to be specifically a real world counterpart. Yeah. But if you take like any like sort of metatextual analysis to it, you can see like where like the level of familiarity the design staff has with like Asian culture and Asian regions, and like the differences between various regions as well. And you can see where they don't have that kind of background, or they're lacking that kind of information familiarity, versus what they are, well, what they're naturally inclined to favor as fundamentally anime fans.
Yeah, and you see that in Shurima as well. Like, they sort of, oh no, League of Legends, the regions are not meant to directly represent. No, really? It's not, you don't have literally Anubis running around in Shurima. You don't have literally Sobek, literally Ra or Horus. You don't have, like... Yeah, it does bother me. It does bother me, like, how all of Africa kind of gets sort of subordinated into an Egypt fantasy.
Yeah. I mean, obviously there are limitations to what you can expect for any designer in terms of, like, they're not expected to be historians, they're expected to be anthropologists, but they should be a little more honest about their limitations in such realms too. And making excuses for why everything looks like Asian, everything looks Japanese, even the Chinese influence stuff. Any sort of excuses just ultimately sounds bad when you apply it to the people actually playing the game and them asking why what they're familiar with and what's obviously inspired by the stuff that makes up their culture isn't represented nearly as well.
Yeah. It's a bugbear for me. Anyway, returning to sort of general broad design of Monster Girls in League of Legends, as we talked about previously, like, I would say that Riot as a company fundamentally has failed to use, title of the stream, the power of the Monster Girl as part of their character design. Like, they use an aesthetic of Monster Girls, like, on top of their characters. They sort of, oh yeah, this one's a robot lady, this one has cyborg legs, this one is a goat Soraka lady, but they only ever apply, like, a vague aesthetic of it. Like, it is that thing of like the girl with the cat ears, like, who puts on little tiny cat ears and now I'm a cat girl, but doesn't adopt any of the, hey, what about, like, the wild, ravenous, murderous instinct of cats, like that they are hunters, that they are killers. Like, where's any of that? No, just cute monster cat, whatever. And it's like there could be so much more done to make these characters different and interesting. Like, Orianna is, like, maybe the most monster girl of all the monster girls in League of Legends, because her story specifically is about, like, being alienated from humanity by her machine heart. Like, actually struggling with a monstrous nature.
Yeah, and this is despite her having was fundamentally just a human form, right? Like, she's proportioned as an attractive human female ultimately. But everything else around her, including how she moves, including how she expresses herself, is very, very monstrous. It's one of the few instances where they actually explored what it meant to be human-looking, but fundamentally not human.
Yeah, and it's like, it's sort of something they try to touch on, as Avian94 says in chat, Camille is just a cyborg. It's something they actually try to touch on with Camille. Like, in her lore, in her story specifically, like, she does go through a dilemma about how much to modify herself and how inhuman to become for the benefit of her house and her social order and her class, like, her class interests and so on. They kind of do that a little bit, but then the way she's actually expressed in game, it's just, no, she's just a stern matron. Like, she's just a stern matriarch, and you don't really get that sense from her. At least I don't think so. Of, like, it's not like a GLaDOS, right? Where, like, there's clearly human intelligence in there, but one which is divorced from human morality. That's not really the case with Camille. Like, she is kind of just a stern older lady.
Yeah, pretty much. Like, she's supposed to be, personality-wise, she's basically a governess with giant scissors.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah. Cassiopeia.
Like, there's no actual...
Go ahead.
Yeah, go on. I'll just say, like, there's no exploration of, like, what it means fundamentally to have your humanity stripped out for maintaining social order. Like, there's a huge, rich field of possible social commentary with Camille and the conflict she might face as basically being turned into a policing weapon, which is completely not touched upon in her actual character, because her designers and her writers in Riot either aren't interested in exploring that space or don't have the tool sets within them to do so.
Yeah, and it is a pity. Like, I'd say that as a character design, she is still a monster girl on the, like, the softer side, but she's, like, again, it's this thing of not using it really to explore. As a counterexample to that, Legends of Runeterra, like, I sort of trying to get myself to get to 14 or 15 times, have done something a lot more interesting with, see if I can bring it up on screen. There we go. The Augur of the Old One specifically, but, like, the troll women in League of Legends are much, much more explicitly allowed to be as monstrous as the troll men. Which is something that I really genuinely do appreciate about Legends of Runeterra, is that, like, hey, for the trolls at least, they took a look and said, okay, if you were a member of the same culture, of the same species, with the same beauty standards, with the same, like, with the same approach to the world, what would that actually look like? And it wouldn't look like a hot, sexy, skinny, like, babe with some fangs or whatever. It looks like, well, it looks like that. It looks like a troll who, to a human, looks at her and goes, wait, hang on, is that a female? Because not human. Like, they transgress humanity. They're humanoid, but they transgress humanity in a way that's not necessarily appealing. I'm happy to say that, but which is interesting.
Yeah, definitely lean heavily on not just the troll aspect, but the shamanistic aspects, rather than any sorts of conventional femininity there. The most you'll get out of it is that if you look closely under the shadow, she seems to have boobs.
Yeah. Pretty much it. Like, it's like you can sort of identify that there are breasts there and she doesn't have a beard. That's about it.
Yeah.
Which is still, like, sexual dimorphism, by the way. It's just sexual dimorphism employed in a way that actually feels a little bit more, like, a little bit more actual real to the species, instead of being replicating human attractiveness with sexual dimorphism.
It's also representing this troll female in her societal role within the troll community, rather than first and foremost as female. Like,
Yeah.
you can see that she's part of the community. She's giving the blessings to a troll warrior, and this is obviously not just like her job, but ultimately like a part of what makes her like a troll. And not just the fact that she's a shaman, but also that she's part of a shaman of the troll community itself, and she plays an authoritative role within that organization. You see a lot of personality, and you also see a lot of her character background just with how she interacts with the warrior.
Yeah, like a lot of her story is on on display just in her design, and like it is also the thing, like, in terms of gender roles, in terms of how a character interacts with gender roles, which again is where a lot of female monster characters, a lot of the time when you see them, the way that they perform femininity, the way that they perform their gender, their female gender, is by being attractive about it. Like, it's sort of like this thing of, like, where what it means to be a woman kind of starts and ends with looks pretty for the purposes of being appealing, which is like, I'm not a woman, but I know that there's more to it than that.
Yeah. We just saw
yeah, there's a super chat.
With...
Actually, Abigail Ruma, Camille is a monster girl, so that means Victor is a monster guy then, right? Yep, he would be.
Yeah, he would be, yeah, clearly. Even if they started human, like, especially with Victor, which is obviously a Frankensteinian take of, like, divorcing yourself from humanity one piece at a time.
Yeah.
Like,
he's a mad scientist and the mad scientist's monster at the same time.
Yeah. The whole point of Victor is that he's supposed to he wants to get as far away from the imperfections of humanity as possible, or at least as he sees it. And every single augmentation takes him further and further away from that. Like, he no longer is bound to just bipedalism. He no longer is bound to just having two hands. His eyes have been replaced. You don't actually have a good idea of what he used to look like before his transformations and his upgrades. Like, the whole point, like, even if he still has a humanoid silhouette, you can very much argue that he is no longer strictly human, except for the very, very human arrogance.
Yeah, and like I will say that in terms of character design, I've said for a long time that Victor they could have done a lot more to make him like a robot herald of the glorious evolution. Like, as a design, they could have done a lot more, but his design and his story are specifically designed to have that tension with humanity, like to have that transgressive relationship with humanity where he has the extra arm, his face is hidden behind this metal visor that he's put over it. Like, there is this attempt to use his monsterhood to be in tension with his humanity rather than just be an accessory on it.
Yep. Earlier we saw Nami on the screen, and that's also an example of how short you can get from like actually using a proper monster design and a proper like exploration of character in their role, right? Like contrasting Nami with the troll matron we saw earlier. Nami is just a fish girl with boobs and the staff. There's no actual like signifiers of like what her purposes are, what her role was in her society before she made her way to land. Whereas it like or any real like distinguishing characteristics that makes her unique, that further like develops the world around her. Whereas when we're talking about Victor, we're talking about the troll matron, we're talking about things that even if it does like have humanoid traits, the fundamental concepts between and the fundamental intentions behind the concept isn't just a focus on what gender they are or what sexuality they are.
Yeah. And the other thing with Nami, like that's the thing that like she has fish breasts, right? Like, and that's in terms of in-lore explanation. Oh well, she's a Vastaya, which means that she's like descended from humans and Vastaya Shirei, which are like sort of the prehistoric pre-Vastaya creatures, whatever. Like, yes, you can absolutely explain it, but for me, it's like she would be a much more interesting design if, specifically because she's a fish, she doesn't have breasts, but she does have gills, like down the side of her body. Or something like that. Like, again, things that put her in tension with humanity. Where she's still female, and still feminine, but just doesn't have, like, the big memories that you would expect on a human. Like, that to me would be more interesting. That would make her a more interesting, compelling design. It would make her more than just a mermaid. Which is kind of the thing, is like, as a character design, what is she? Just a mermaid. Like all the other mermaids, but with some League of Legends gear attached to her. Where it would be more interesting to me if League of Legends had its own vision for what could a mermaid possibly be that does something different, like that incorporates more fish-like facial features, or like does anything to bring it away from the traditional conception of just a mermaid.
Yeah, and we see examples like how they could have taken this too with other designs from other franchises. Like, I'm not sure if we'll have the time to get to her within 2 hour block, but especially Mifa from Breath of the Wild, and frankly a lot of other shark designs I've seen elsewhere, where instead of breasts you do have the gills, but they do outline a human shape or a human outline-ish to better represent the fact that they're supposed to be a hybrid creature, but that they're not fully human.
Yeah.
Whereas Nami is basically, there are plenty of places where you can buy a mermaid tail and cosplay as Nami pretty convincingly, without a whole lot of trouble. Like, yeah, Mifa here is a perfect design of exploration of what it means to have a female merfolk that is humanoid and even attractive, but clearly not human whatsoever.
Yeah, and I think the Zora in like pretty much all of the Legend of Zelda games do a much better job of having that, like, of bringing in the chimeric, like the hybrid fish person thing, and playing within the space of that. Even with characters like Ruto, who's like perhaps the most sort of traditionally typical hot girl mermaid character, like she has a lot more sort of inhuman features to her, the way that she's constructed. And what I really like about Mifa, by the way, since we have her on screen in a way, I like the distortion of proportion where her upper body is just too long, and like her hips and her legs are really, really short by contrast, because again, that implies something about, oh, okay, maybe that's good for swimming in her case. Like it implies that there is a different set of physical requirements for her biology than there are for a human.
Yeah. And that should be how you're designing like non-human elements, right? Like, what makes them non-human other than the fact that they got a palette swap and a couple like secondary characteristics, which is what we don't see with Nami. Like,
yeah.
I'm pretty sure one of the fundamental like issues with Nami's design is that she would very much be a warm weather creature, because there's no way she's stored enough fat as a mammalian descendant character to last in the deep seas.
Yeah, it gets real cold down there.
Yeah.
Real freaking cold. Right. Well, that puts an end to the League of Legends block, I think. So we'll take a brief intermission. And then we'll be back to talk about some individual Monster Girl favorites, whomst we like, and take specific questions from the audience. I hope you are all having a good time, and we will be back in a few minutes. And we're back, and we are going to move this discussion along from League of Legends and Blizzard, who have had far too much of our attention and interest, to talk about some personal favorites in the Monster Girl space for ourselves. And we'll start with the obvious, Lady D.
Yep.
And I believe you put her on the list, so why don't you start?
Yep. If you've been on the internet anytime in the last 3 months, you've definitely seen people pop off with Resident Evil's new giant lady. And even though she's not even the main boss, and I think she dies pretty early on, spoilers. The fact that she's extremely popular has not gone amiss, given that she is basically the ideal of the goth Dami mommy.
Yeah.
To put it frank. She's on her face is extremely human looking. She's basically a Southern Belle. But given her gigantic proportions, she's more than 10 feet tall. The claws she brings out, and the fact that she is in fact a vampiric sadistic monster, she's attracted a lot of attention, and not exactly negative attention either. As Chad has said, she's attracted the attention of mostly true men of culture, which is another way to say that the internet has gone exceedingly horny for her. Now, does she still qualify as a monster girl despite being conventionally just a woman? Yes, very, very much so. In both demeanor, execution, and just sheer terrifying presence. Those glowing golden eyes are not there just to look pretty. The fact that they look like a predator's eyes is very, very deliberate.
Yeah, and that's the thing is of what we talked about, where in modern conceptions, a lot of people don't really think of vampires as monster girls anymore. But that's the thing about monsterhood is it's about that transgression against humanity, and oftentimes when it comes especially to female monster characters, it's about transgressions against traditional femininity, which Lady D absolutely is, because nothing about her is demure. Nothing about her is submissive or reticent. She does not sit quietly and wait for a man to speak for her. What she is in terms of her function, and this also comes down to her size and her character design, is she is a transgression against masculine power and dominance, which the size is like the most obvious expression of that. She's bigger than you, she is stronger than you, she can pick you up with one hand, and she will if she feels like it. Like there is this, like, and that nowadays, hopefully, that's not so much of a monstrous transgression against the social norm as it used to be, but it used to be a lot. Like, that used to be an extreme social transgression. That used to be the kind of thing that you burn women at the stake for. And that's part of what makes her, and what makes monster girls, vampires rather, monster girls in general, is that they transgress against what the standard for humanity is, like the typical behavior, the typical mode of being that humanity is allowed, which is why, again, when it comes back to why the LGBT community oftentimes has such an affinity for monsters, like a lot of people point to that as part of it, is that monsters are inherently transgressive against heteronormativity, as it were, against like the normal standards of polite society, air quotes. And so if you are someone who gets told every day of your life that you are a transgression, that you are unnatural, that you are some kind of a monster, like, yeah, no shit, you start to find like something to admire or something to be attracted to in monstrous characters.
Or if not attracted to, then at least you find the more conventional stuff representative of what's made you struggle and what's like kept you oppressed all this time, right?
Yeah.
So even if you're not necessarily attracted to Lady D, you at least understand why people would be compared to what's supposed to be the conventional standard.
Yeah, there's a couple of super chats we should probably deal with. Heisei says, the hottest monster boy is Fiddlesticks and I'm sexually attracted to him. That is entirely valid. I saw in the Monster Fucker community, a lot of them got quite excited about Fiddlesticks. Because, I mean, he's a, like, scary monster who's made of tentacles in a cage. So, makes sense.
Oh, yeah. I would say...
Triarch sent a super chat saying, as far as merfolk designs for monster girls and guys, the merfolk from Magic the Gathering are quite well designed. I'm not so familiar with Magic the Gathering. Like, I haven't played it since I was, like, 15.
Yeah. There's a reason why I avoided any of the Magic the Gathering examples for this session, because if we started there, we would never end.
Yeah.
There's literally way too many examples. There are literally thousands of them, tens of thousands of varying rarity and quality levels. But you are right that the Magic the Gathering depictions of merfolk tend to be better overall. That's because they have had literally more than 2 decades to really explore the space. And given that they have an iterative product that doesn't release just once a year, but multiple times throughout the year on a cyclical basis, they definitely need to be as inventive as possible in order to stay in front of demand.
Yeah, I'm not so familiar with Magic, but returning to Lady D is like, and that's like part of the thing that I like about her is that, like, we have this, like, she is like traditionally hyper feminine, like very, like, there's nothing about her that transgresses femininity as such, except her size, which I think is, as a design, is very, very clever. It's also part of why I think, like, it's not just the monster fuckers, but the whole internet got so horny for her, is that, like, take away the aspect that she is very large and very powerful, and she is much more of like a conventional 1930s, like, just a beautiful woman. But then there's that, like, then there's the other little aspects on top of it that make her uncanny, that make her, like, feel like something other. That make her feel like the glowing eyes, like the fact that she can make knife hands, like her physical aggression, like the fact that she can be kind of physically intimidating and aggressive and tower over you. And I just, like, as a character design, I just think she's really well executed. And like, I refuse to believe that the Capcom people didn't know what they were getting into. Like, I refuse to believe that they were entirely surprised by it. I refuse to believe it. But they were probably surprised by just how mainstream the thirst for her got.
The only comparable situation I can think of was Bowsette from a couple years ago, which is also another example of like dominant femininity. Another example of, quite frankly, scarily obsessive reactions to a goth doming mommy.
Yeah.
It seems as if this generation of the internet has a certain preference, quite frankly.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think there's definitely something to that. With Bowsette also, it was, like, a lot of it was also driven by, I know, the trans community online, who, like, immediately, oh, the super crown can turn you into a girl, can it? It can change your gender, you say. And they got quite enthusiastic about that. And because a lot of very good artists are trans, a lot of very good art came out of it. And it sort of created this feedback loop where a whole bunch of really good art got disseminated really quickly that kind of spurred it on, which I thought was very interesting to watch that unfold in real time.
Oh yeah, that was a lot of fun. It might have gone a little excessive, but it was a lot of fun. And we honestly do see similar attitudes with Lady D, in which like her demeanor is very masculine. Her posture is extremely confident, and this is despite her being like otherwise signaled heavily as feminine and like physically.
Yeah,
which
like she performs her femininity in a way that is not heteronormative.
Yeah, and I think the only time you see her defer to anybody is to somebody that she's supposed to defer in the first place, her boss, basically.
Yeah, her mother.
Yeah. Which, and in every other case, including with her co-conspirators and colleagues, she's otherwise very menacing, very aggressive, and takes shit from nobody.
Yeah,
a lot of fun.
Oh, she's a very fun character. I still need to play Resident Evil Village for myself, but I look forward to it. So, moving on to one of my favorites, Tali Zora vs. Normandy, technically, by the end of the game, from the Mass Effect series. So, for those who are not familiar, she is a Quarian, which is a race of aliens who have a very weak immune system from living in space for too long, so they have to be confined to these environment suits that essentially constitute the entirety of how they can ever appear to anyone outside of their very, very closest family with whom they can share an actual physical space. Like for small periods of time for births, and for procreation. And I like the Quarians as a concept in Mass Effect are just cool overall. But what I really like about Tali Zora as a character design is that there is this mixing of both like the fact, like the alien thing of like she's a different species from a completely different world. Now BioWare, we should probably clarify this. With BioWare, all of their playable alien characters are essentially human, because of the way that the Mass Effect games handle their animation. They didn't have the budget to create unique animation rigs and completely unique animation sets for like completely different species with like more limbs or whatever. So that's why many of the Mass Effect aliens are humanoid. But what I like about Tali Zora is that in her design, there's this mixture between like these very organic shapes that dominate her. Like where you can see like the hood that she has over her helmet sort of imitates the shape of a hairdo. You can see the straps across her chest that sort of push up her breasts and like emphasize that fluid, curvy, organic humanity contrasted against the hard plastic of the helmet, contrasted against the sort of robotic appearance of like a lot of the components of her suit that kind of need to be mechanical. I really like that tension where she's like essentially kind of a cyborg in her design aesthetic, but not actually as a character, which I found very fascinating.
Yeah. And obviously a lot of emphasis was put on the fact that you're supposed to be attracted to her even if you can't see her face. The way that they present her as cute and endearing has everything to do with personality and nothing to do with her curves, really. Like, ultimately, although she has a recognizable silhouette, in terms of like physical details, she's not by far the most standout female character in that aspect. The way she's portrayed as attractive is almost entirely based on personality traits instead.
Yeah, and like there is definitely like the aspect of like it's a humanoid female in a tight-fitting suit, which obviously, you know, that's always a little bit sexualized. Yeah. But I do like that they take the face away from you. Like you can sort of barely see like her eyes glowing in there a little bit, like the outline of her face maybe, but they deny that aspect to you, which is one of the things that like we talked about with Riot specifically, is that Riot, for them, the face is sacrosanct. Like, you can't put scars on the face, you can't mess with the face has to be immaculate on every goddamn character, which is one of the things that annoys me. And one of the things that Tali does is that she says, okay, but can we create an appealing, interesting character with Monster Girl characteristics without that? And you can, turns out. Riot, turns out you can do that. You can actually do it. You can.
Turns out it's not actually that hard as long as you just make her have personality. And as Lady Octopus just stated in chat, does it say something about me that she's more attractive with the mask on? I would say you're not actually alone in that.
No.
In fact, I found it very disappointing to actually find out what she looked like with the mask off, because that was a failure in design.
Yeah, and funny story about that, actually. The way that Riot, like, if you romance Tali in the original Mass Effect, you get a picture of her without her mask on that sits on Shepard's desk. But the way that they made that picture was that they took a stock photograph from some stock photograph website and they just painted over it. And it did not look good. Here's the one on the left is the original of what Tali Zora apparently looked like under her mask, which is just like a stock photograph of like a human lady where they've like taken two of the fingers off her hand because Quarians only have 3, and it looks awful. It looks terrible. On the right, they did an updated version for the Mass Effect Legendary Edition where they actually took the time to create some assets of what she looks like. And I still think it's disappointing to see her face. Like, I think part of the appeal of her is that it doesn't really matter. Like, that's not what she's about. Like, the face isn't really the important thing. But
it makes her physical characteristics, especially her like physical attractiveness, a sort of reward for being nice to her for a sufficient long period of time.
Yeah.
Which really rubs me the wrong way.
Yeah, it's not the greatest way to handle a character. I wish they just hadn't done that. But
also, she looks too human.
Yeah, she looks too human. Like, I would have liked her to look more specifically alien, but oh well. Anyway.
I mean, we're talking about the company that infamously gave us Garrus, and we know what the female player base feels about Garrus. So why don't we have that with Tali?
Yeah.
Like there's a missed opportunity here, quite clearly, given what their fan base are and what their fan base is attracted to. And what they're attracted to is birdmen.
I can't say I blame them. Anyway, moving on to this character from Darkstalkers, whomst I don't know. I think it's one of yours.
Senko, the Chinese vampire / mummy. The specifics of that mythology gets a little much. But Darkstalkers probably has what I would argue as some of the best monster girl designs, despite looking conventionally attractive. Senko especially emphasizes, well, this specific image doesn't necessarily do the best job of it, but the emphasis for her characters is the use of her claws, which with the, what was the actual phrase for it? It's, unfortunately, a lot of my Chinese language files have been so thoroughly corrupted as to be useless, but let me see.
I think this picture shows off the claws character. Better.
Yes. Yep. The Jiangxi character mythology is that of a vampire / zombie from like the imperial periods of China, which infamously bounced along instead of conventionally walking, which was a natural result of corpses being transported along like flexible bamboo poles. But the main thing is that rigor mortis will cause their arms to hang out like claws, which is what you see with the character here and what her character is supposed to emphasize. I mean, there is the cleavage window, there is the boobs, and the fact that her face is conventionally attractive, but her claws take up 50% of her character right here, which is kind of awesome. It's representative not only of what her design is supposed to be as a fighting game character, but also like extreme emphasis on what the mythology around the character is supposed to be like, and that's honestly just a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, a monster girl character who's like a vampire designed around rigor mortis as a design concept. Yep. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, the Jiangxi are partially vampires and that they do suck essences out of people, and partially mummies because it was mostly just the preservation method that made them look as they are. And the overall concept of it, like the utility of that particular mythology and Darkstalkers, makes her a memorable character, more so than how big her boobs are or how conventionally attractive she is. Because there's nothing necessarily attractive about having 2-tongue claws like battering your character around, but it's definitely memorable and definitely reflective of her more monstrous traits than anything else. That's what you're going to be remembering. Plus the fact that she's a bouncy, like kind of airheaded character, but that's neither here nor there with the design itself.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know much about Darkstalkers. Like, all I know about Darkstalkers is that the concept is essentially like, what if all of the classic monsters were fighting? Yeah. Which is like a compelling idea. Yeah, that's like I do find it very interesting. Like a zombie character that actually incorporates rigor mortis. I don't think I've heard of that anywhere else. Zombies usually supposed to be these like loose ragdoll creatures that sort of shamble around very fluidly. Is that also why I think they're the vampires that can only hop, right? That can only jump.
Yes, indeed. That is in fact the Jiangxi character, the Jiangxi mythology that she's based around. Mir Pahima said in chat, I couldn't tell she was a vampire except for her claws, and that's specifically because it's a difference between the Western and Eastern mythologies around vampires, right? There's obviously very little overlap except for what they consume. And for the Jiangxi Chinese mythology, it's about life force rather than strictly blood. But other than that, yeah, they have at least that minimum overlap in that they consume something for the living to sustain themselves.
Yeah, like the draining of life force as a general concept rather than literalized through blood.
Yep.
Interesting.
Unfortunately, I can't say that Darkstalkers is necessarily consistent with how creative they are with their monster designs, because definitely Morgan and Felicia are more of what we would expect from really traditional cheesecake designs.
Yeah, they're succubi, aren't they?
Succubus. Yeah. Morgan, yes. Felicia's more just like a cat girl, honestly. A cat girl in a cat girl costume.
Oh, yeah, Felicia. I thought there's Morgan and then she has a sister, right?
Yeah. Which the only difference there is how big the chests are or are not.
Of course it is.
Yeah. And I mean, in terms of like what kind of characters they are and how they're portraying Darkstalkers, certainly there's something compelling there. But in terms of like their actual designs, definitely I would say that Senko is further up in terms of how creative they were with how they utilize the mythology and the overall design.
Right. So moving on to one of mine, and here we have Megura from Hades, who's one of the Furies of that game. And what's interesting about that is that, as far as I know, there isn't like a super consistent visual description of what the Furies look like in Greek mythology. Like, I think there's a few different ones, but with Megara specifically, like, she's very much, again, as we already talked about with Lady D, like the goth dom that the internet kind of fell in love with very hard and very fast, which I think says something about our collective unconscious. But yeah, like Meg, for me, like the thing that kind of that drew me to her as a character is that there's a lot of very traditional femininity with her, right? Like, she has the heavy eyeshadow, she has the bright pink lipstick, she has like the hair up in the ponytail, and there is an hourglass shape there, but it's all contrasted against, like, she has these very angular features, which are sort of more traditionally masculine. She's like full of spikes, especially on her shoulders, which gives her this prickly standoffish air, like literally if you touched her you might get hurt kind of feeling.
Yeah.
And that
those
again,
can cut concrete.
Yeah, and that again creates that tension, like between what is socially expected traditionally of femininity and a performance of that femininity that is very, like, that feels much more specific to her and specific to how she wants to be as a character. And then of course there's the like the dom aspect. She has a whip, like there's no way around it.
Yeah.
Which the game also incorporates directly into the romance scenes, by the way.
She may be in the bottom of Hades' realm, but she's certainly no bottom.
Yeah. This is very true. And it's again the thing of like, what's the minimum requirement for a monster girl? And it's like Meg only, and you kind of can't see that here because I'm on a black background, but Meg only really has a bat wing. Like, that's kind of the extent of the monstrous characteristics that she has. But where, again, I would argue that, like, the thing that makes her a monster girl is not just the physical characteristic itself, but the way that it's operationalized. Meg is a fury, which means that she is someone who punishes sinners. Well, not sinners in the Christian sense, but people who have transgressed against the gods, certainly, get their lashings from Megara and from her sisters. And, like, the thing that makes her monstrous is, again, that transgression of like the traditional performance of her gender. Like, the traditional performance of femininity does not involve kicking men's asses, but for Meg it very much does. It's very much a part of her character, and that's part of what makes her appealing to me, is that, like, it is this character with whom in the game itself you have an adversarial relationship. You have to kill her over and over again in order to try and escape Hades, and she has to try to kill you over and over again because that's her job. Which is like not the typical situation in which you might expect to develop a romance, but yet you do over the course of the game, where the interpersonal violence becomes this almost kinky aspect of the relationship. But certainly something that the characters like mostly just kind of choose to gloss over, as this is just the conditions under which we have to live. Like, we have to inflict violence upon each other, but there can still be affection there.
Yeah, a very spiky sort of affection, but in bedroom play, those whips are not necessarily meant to punish.
Again, transgressing the traditional gender stereotypes and roles. Moving on to QB, another character I think is from Darkstalkers. Yeah,
and a fan favorite for many reasons. QB, what I would call a bit of a anglerfish design, in which she's definitely supposed to be attractive female with really, really, say, prominent aspects to her. But then you actually look into what QB is and how she not fights, but hunts and reproduces. She's very much a horror character in every aspect. The eyes you see are not actually eyes. The antennas are how she sees things. And getting close to her and fueling her up is probably a terrible idea, because how she reproduces is injects you with her live young. That is how she fights. That's how she does damage to you. And that's how you will expire before her. I would say that when I was exposed to QB as a character in her combat animations, it was honestly a little too off-putting. I would not necessarily recommend anybody who's particularly sensitive to body horror to look it up themselves. But if you want to give the audience of your impression, I highly encourage Googling her or YouTube, finding a clip of her on YouTube especially, and let me know how you like that. Because there's nothing quite like seeing somebody fall apart as a mass, as a living hive of freshly born bees.
Boy, yeah, damn. You said anglerfish, yeah. That's like interesting, because that sort of incorporates, like, again, that subversion of traditional gender roles. She impregnates you.
Yeah. And her blue, the classic blue and yellow morality that you see on TV tropes, that applies to this character, because she sees nothing wrong with turning you into a hive. And even if she looks human, she doesn't move like a human being or think like a human being or act like a human being, except for like acting kind of cutesy, just enough to draw you in closer to the stinger.
Oh, the name is QB. Pretty much as it sounds. Someone asked in chat.
Yep.
And yeah, like, again, what constitutes monsterhood? Like, this is where I would say, as a character design, she's very much like the aspect of like just human in cute costume, but clearly with the story, like I think with the eyes are the big thing that really kind of do it. Like, the eyes on her human face are just these black lumps, and then her actual eyes are on top of her head. Like, that's enough, like, where it becomes uncanny. Again, tension with humanity, rather than just human in a costume. Here, there's like, oh, that's a human in a car. Oh, no, wait, that's not a human in a costume.
Yeah, it's an eldritch carnivorous figure, or worse, carnivorous. She's looking at you as if you're nothing more than something to deposit eggs in. But the best part of this is how misleading her 2D character, her 2D representation is. Because QB in motion is definitely where the monster in Monster Girl comes out. So even if you're seeing nothing more than a cute girl in the bee suit here, wait until you fight against her.
Yeah, I'm looking it up on YouTube right now. Let me see.
Yep.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I see that. Like, yeah. Oh, that's a very different way to move. Yeah, she moves like with her arms hanging down weirdly. Oh, that's creepy. That is very creepy, actually.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a cool design. And that's the other thing, like, you can have a completely human-looking character, but if their animation, if their movement, again, that thing about being in tension with humanity, if they move in a way that just isn't right, in a way that isn't correct, and this is something Oriana does very well in her character model, actually, even though she's so old, her entire character model clicks and, like, jerks around very unnaturally in a way that precludes her from being traditionally attractive because she just doesn't move like something that you would want to touch.
Yeah. She's only human in a strictly technical sense.
Yeah.
And that technicality might be in like over her overall physical characteristics as at first blush, but everything else, no, that's as far as human as you can get.
Yeah. Someone in chat mentions Double from Skullgirls, actually, and yes, it's not really the one I was intended to talk about Priscilla in a second, but I'll bring up Double from Skullgirls here. Now, I'm not super familiar with Skullgirls lore, but there's some great character design in there. And sorry for the body horror, by the way, but Double is...
Oh, yeah.
Like, if you want to talk, like, if we've talked a lot about, like, is this character too human to be a monster girl? Here we can talk about whether this character is too monster to be a girl.
Yeah. I mean, there are obviously very, very human traits in here. You even get what's blatantly a panty flash. And yet,
yeah,
this is basically Hester as a girl walking around about to consume you. This is the Yellow King given form.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Someone brings it up in chat. Yeah, like, Double is just a monster. Yeah, I mean, yeah, arguably, that's sort of the thing of like, if the monster girl is defined by being, like, something which is human, but which is in tension with humanity, like, which transgresses humanity in some way, then a character design like Double sort of asks the question, okay, but how much can you transgress before it doesn't make sense to talk about you as human anymore? Because Double does have, like, some of the aspects that you would expect from a sort of sexy traditional monster girl, in the sense that she's just wearing panties. She's got what seems to be like thigh-high socks on or whatever, but her lower body is completely disconnected from her upper body. She's got, like, breasts and a sort of semi-attractive human face hanging off the side of her shoulder rather than as part of her main body. And, like, there's lots of feminine attributes in here. Like, there's lots of... Let's see if I can zoom in on it a little bit, which, again, apologies for the body horror. You can see that there's, like, these hanging flesh things that approximate the shape of breasts on her. Like, there is a femininity to her. Clearly a femininity to her. But it's so... Like, it's really far in the direction of where you kind of go, is that a girl anymore? I'd say she still is, because she's still clearly meant to be, like, a transgression against humanity. Like, she's the human form. Everything. Yeah, she's the human form, like, sort of torn apart and reassembled in an unpleasant way. In a transgressive way.
The least horrifying way to describe this is as if you were looking at a human female through the fourth dimension, stretched out and reassembled.
Yeah, it's cubist. It's a cubist human.
Yeah, and that's obviously a big deal about how, like, Skullgirls does the character designs in the first place. The feminine aspects of the characters is almost used as bait to make you consume Eldritch horror. But this is especially so with Double, which is blatantly nothing kind in general at all. Not only just spikes, but just, like, gross cancerous horror and every possible angle, intermingled with human sexuality, just to really, really give you a mind trip.
Yeah. Yeah, and I do, you see something similar to a lesser extent with Misfortune, where it's like, oh, like 90% of the time she's like, oh, it's a cute anime cat girl who can throw her head, like, take her head off and throw it. That's fun. But then there's those times when she, like, disassembles her body and, like, does an attack where she stretches out her tendons as her arm falls apart, and, like, blah, like, which is like, oh no. That's, like, a little much. But again, like, that tension of the thing which is just human enough to kind of to create the backlash in your mind when it transitions into the horrifying. Anyway, something entirely more pleasant.
Yes, please.
Yeah. Here's Priscilla from Dark Souls, who is, like, I never spend enough time around her because I didn't kill her, because I'm not a monster, to sort of develop a huge sort of monster girl crush on her, but she's one of the sort of the monster girl waifus of the Dark Souls community. And it's kind of, on this picture, it's maybe not as clear, but she has a little bit of that Lady D energy because she is huge. She's like 12 feet tall. She's a very, very tall lady with a big scythe who can and will absolutely kill a lot of you many, many times. Go invisible, like very dangerous and murdery, but as a character design, she has, unlike Lady D, who has this like very sort of confident, powerful, like sort of semi-aggressive energy. Priscilla is much more traditionally feminine. Like, she's much more sort of demure. She's much more cutesy in the way that she's put together. She's much more sort of like pleasantly designed, and she has the big fluffy tail. She has the big fluffy body, which is not. This is not a dress that she's wearing. That's actual fur. That's actual body hair that she's got going on, which makes her sort of very cutesy and kind of appealing, and you kind of just want to touch her and pet her. In a sort of pleasant way. It gives her an air of innocence, which you immediately disabuse yourself off if you actually try and fight her, because she is tough. But as a monster design, I quite like again, that you have that overwhelming size that makes her an other. Like, that just makes her transgressive, that makes her something other than just a cute girl in an outfit. But then everything else about her character design is just designed to be fully appealing, just to be fully cutesy. Like, again, that tension that I like.
Yeah, she's not necessarily designed to be like sensual, but she is designed to be vulnerable, from the way she holds her hands to the fact that she's barefooted in the first place. Like, there's a lot of signifiers here that this is not something you should want to attack or want to victimize, and yet, well, it's Dark Souls, and
yeah, everyone kills everything in Dark Souls eventually. But yeah, I also like that about like the way that you engage with her in the story, is that you have to attack her. Like, she will not start it, but she will finish it many, many times.
Oh yeah.
If you try it, but she's not like specifically a hostile or aggressive person. She's just someone who's living inside this painting and who would like to be left alone, please.
Yeah. And forcing you to be the transgressor for that particular fight is also a nice little narrative wrinkle, because you ultimately do feel bad about this.
Yeah. You really do. So here is another one of yours, I think, and one that was brought up in chat as well, Taokaka.
Yep. So for a cat girl, this is definitely not traditional cat girl. It might be a little cheesecakey, especially with the panty flash over there, but Taokaka is more cat than girl, especially with a very, very furrow, fang-filled grin she has at every moment. This is the trickster archetype of the Kate Sith, and honestly, Arxis had a lot of fun with her character, with her overall character. She's frantic, she's manic, and she's not entirely human. When I say feral, I really mean it.
Is that again in terms of her animations and the way she moves and behaves?
Yep. Oh, that's my phone going off by accident. Let me take care of that. Yep, sorry about that.
Nice ringtone.
Yes. It's actually the default ringtone. But yeah, despite the fact that Arxis doesn't have necessarily the most transgressive designs for their monster girls, they do have pretty fun and exaggerated features, right? Like the fact that you never actually see her face, the fact that her face are threatening red eyes with a grin with a million teeth.
Yeah, Cheshire cat grin.
Definitely makes her more than what you would naturally consider a cat girl.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of can't get over just like the blatant panty flash it's got going on in this artwork. Which, like, that's kind of funny to me, but there is, like you say, there is that tension. Is like that face does not look like... It's kind of like Talizora has this, like, she denies you access to her face as a character design. This one is more like, no, there's a face there. You can look at it if you want to, but it's not attractive. Like, this is not a face that's designed to appeal to you. It's a face that's designed to unnerve you. And so there's that little transgression again, where she's perfectly willing to expose some parts of her, but there's another part of her that stays away from you, that stays hidden, which I also find interesting about the overcoat, that she's like this big-ass overcoat that covers up every part of her upper body, and then there's thigh.
Yep. And yeah, there's thigh, because ultimately Blaze Blue characters are meant to be sexy to some extent.
Yeah.
But the main focus here is, again, with the claws, just like with Senko, and that the emphasis here is that she's going to be battering you around, if not clawing you up, especially with what looks like slits for her claws, which there are. Her attacks are very much claw based. So yeah, cat girl, yes, and standard anime cat girl with the crow hands going yang at you, looking very human. Not necessarily. And in terms of animation, she very much like emphasizes the fact that she's still supposed to be a cat based character rather than a girl that looks like a cat.
Yeah, and that's the other that's the other thing is like if her behavior, the way that she behaves, is very much animal or monster coded, that's also a way to create a monster girl character. I think that like again is interesting because then again you get that tension between like what the sexualization that's obviously on display, where like you can kind of go, oh, she's attractive, and then she starts to move, and you go like, oh no, that's not. Oh boy.
Yeah, I like QB. Her movements aren't necessarily like horrifying. The cats are still cute when they move around, but definitely a feral cat is the sort of cute that you want to stay out of Claw's range of.
Yeah, I know that from bitter experience.
Yep. Cat scratch fever is nothing to laugh at.
Yeah.
Or it's nothing to laugh at if it happens to you.
Yeah. Anyway, we've talked about Mifa a little bit already, but just to sort of reiterate some of the things about her that specifically I like, it is that distortion of proportion, unintentional rhyme there, with like the very long upper body, with the arms that like if you took Mifa's body and you made her proportions normal, like you made the legs the correct length for her torso, her arms would look weird because they would be out of proportion with her legs in some really interesting ways. Like I like that thing of like messing about with the proportions of a character, which is we saw also actually with Taokaka arguably with like those very, very long arms because of the long sleeves that she's got going on. That gives you that slight uncanny feeling. But I just like Mifa's just very cute. She's just a very cute little monster girl who's really well designed to not look too human. Like just monstrous enough, you know.
Like obviously there's enough human characteristics to be considered cute in the first place, especially with the large eyes, especially with the overall like lip features, right? And that's human enough to draw you in and to be considered conventionally cute in the first place. But because ultimately she has a shark forehead, for God's sake, yeah. it's definitely not human. It's like strictly human. It's just human enough to count as recognizably a cute female of the species, something that we can start recognizing as cute, and then there's everything else in the package.
Yeah, and as Chad has suddenly realized, Goat Mom, yes. Toriel from Undertale, and this is one of mine that I wanted to bring in kind of as a contrast to the tall dummy mommies that we've otherwise discussed right now, because Toriel is in her conception essentially a literal nanny goat. Like that's basically she's literally a nanny goat. She sees this child fall into the underground and takes on the responsibility of mothering that child as part of the way that her character's conceived. And so here we have like a monster girl with a very different energy. And another thing about Toriel is that despite what the internet has done to her, she's not at all a sexualized character. Like not even a little bit. She wears this frumpy robe that conceals pretty much all of whatever form she has underneath. And the only really sort of part of her that's appealing and attractive is her face, where she has these sort of big anime-looking eyes. But even there, and again, it's kind of hard to tell from exactly what it's supposed to be from the sprite. She kind of seems to have fangs or something along those lines, or maybe it's her nose.
I think it's fangs. The things that I've seen the internet do to her is just not worth. Oh God, it's terrible. It's terrible. The poor woman.
Yeah, it's the internet has changed the interpretation of the character around somewhat, but here we have a monster girl who has that mommy energy, but where the mommy energy is not sexualized. Like at all. Not that stops people from doing it, but the character itself does not imply any kind of sexuality at all. There's no sexualization on display here, but she still like has this cute sort of energy, and there's still that tension with humanity where, okay, whatever else this is, it's definitely not a human person.
It's definitely the eyes. Yeah. If you want to present something as like conventionally cute, you go with like big humanish eyes. especially with the eyelashes in particular standing out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I just wanted to bring her up as a contrast to Lady D in that, like, the whole transgressing against humanity doesn't always have to be sexual. Like, it doesn't have to be a sex thing every time. Sometimes transgressing against humanity can just be applying an animal characteristic, which is what people have been asking about a lot in chat, by the way, is furries, for example. How do furries fit into Monster Girls? And I would argue that it sort of depends a little bit, because a lot of furries are not conceptualized as oppositional to humanity at all. Like, they are just humans that happen to have animal characteristics, but, like, there's a lot in and this is sort of the semiotics of it that I'm getting into, but with furry specifically, I feel like a lot of them are designed to just be, I'm drawing a human wrong, kind of. Like, I'm drawing a human, but I'm not letting them look human. But it's not designed to interact really with animal nature or their animalness. And then again, other furries absolutely are monster girls because they're very much about being, like, what if human, but with these animal characteristics, with this animal personality, with this transgressive nature against what is conventional, which comes up a lot in especially LGBT furry art, where, like, they use the animalness of the characters to sort of go, okay, let's think through who this character is as an other to, like, standard humanity.
Yeah. What was it? I heard it was a terrible joke I saw over TikTok earlier, but Egyptian gods were basically the first furries, even if they were basically just a human body with an animal head. And honestly, that's the main issue with a lot of entry-level furry designs, and that they are basically the biggest difference between their body types and a regular human is the addition of fur and sometimes the tail, and not always.
So someone is asking about Hornet in chat, and right now I'm on Google Images trying to find a picture of her that's not horny. Here. Oh, found one. Found one. Thank God. Thank God. Team Cherry's official art for Silk Song. There we go. Found it. Hooray. Thank you, Team Cherry.
Thank God.
God, that's a lot of horny on Google. Even Google Images. I'm on Safe Search on, and that shit gets horny. Jesus.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's interesting. Like the Hollow Knight characters as Monster Girls and Monster Boys. That's I don't actually have a strong answer to that one because theoretically they're just supposed to be bugs.
Humanoid bugs.
Yeah, they're definitely humanoid though. Yeah.
Although, especially with Silk Song, it's a little hard to, like, pinpoint exactly what makes her feminine compared to her predecessor, right? Like, the best you can say is that her cloak looks a bit like a dress, but there's nothing overtly, like,
it's also the eyes, like the almond eye shape, helps feminize her character design a bit.
Yeah, but even then, it's like it's just barely there enough for our pattern recognition obsessed brains to pick up on. But only in contrast to a prior character, right? Like, if she was the starting character of the game, there would be basically a bit of a Samus thing going on, where you really wouldn't be able to tell what gender she was unless the game, like, specifically pointed it out.
Yeah, she has a feminine voice in game. Like, that's probably the thing that's gonna hit it for you. But I could definitely see someone, like, playing Hornet to start with and not realizing that she's female.
Yeah,
interesting.
And frankly, especially for a setting like this, that makes sense, right? They're not supposed to have, like, physically at least, all that much to do with humanity compared to bugs.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting.
Granted, Hornets tend to be, like, codified as female in the first place because we're told that most of the hive, 99% of the hive is going to be female, but that's, like, outside information coloring our perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting, like, Hornet as a monster girl, because, like, initially just because she has a humanoid body, like, she has 2 legs and 2 arms, and she moves in a human manner, I would say, yeah, probably, like, you could argue her as a monster girl, absolutely, but I don't think I have a strong answer to it necessarily.
Yeah.
Alvaro Tavares, the thing about Hornet is that her personality can be extremely attractive, the type of introvert, hardened person with a soft core. Yeah, I don't think that's necessarily specific to Monster Girls, but that's definitely part of why a lot of people like her.
It's also not specific to girls in the first place, and especially
Yeah.
yeah, introverted hard person with a soft core. Gee, I wonder how many male characters were intended to be portrayed that way, right? Like,
Yeah, it's a common archetype for sure. So I think this is the last one of yours, which is Aya Shamemaru.
yeah, from the Toho series, which is chock full of monster girls with more emphasis on girls than monster. If you've seen any of the harpy designs in Western media or in anime as well, this is very obviously a pretty standard depiction. The only real difference is that Tengu as a mythology isn't necessarily like particularly well represented even in anime. So a lot of like what makes a Toho character memorable, other than their hats, which is an infamous meme, has to do with their secondary representation in media, rather than their physical characteristics. I actually consider Toho something where the Monster Girl aesthetic actually kind of fails, given that, to be quite honest, there's actually no good representation of how monsters they are compared to how much of a girl they are in general.
Yeah, because Toho, as far as I remember, like, isn't pretty much all Toho art fan art?
Yes, actually, there are some official art that's a lot better than the game themselves, at least conventionally more appealing. A lot of the media I brought up for the purpose of discussion, for example, was from the officially licensed manga that was made for the series, which there is a very, very loose canon, but in the end, it's mostly just girls playing tag with bullets. Like, there's no actual like real in-depth exploration of what makes the various factions within that universe different from each other, other than the fact that the more monstrous ones supposedly have a preference for human flesh at most. But, like, that's never actually explored. And if anything, in the canon, I believe that's actually one of the things that was not bred out of them, but excised from them, almost exorcised even by the cast. Like, they technically don't prey on humans anymore, but they do fool around with humans and mess them up. The closest you can possibly get to that are possibly the vampires. Lady Octopus mentioned Flandre, which is definitely one of the more destructive girls in the cast. But even then, as monstrous as her behavior is supposed to be, what you see in the game and media is nothing more than a girl that happens to play a little too rough.
That's interesting. Give me a sec. I am finding some assets for some people who asked about a thing that we can bring up in a moment. One sec. I freaking got these WebP files to cooperate with me.
They never really do.
They never do. They never do. Because those were all the characters that we sort of had in mind to talk about, which means now we can talk about the characters that you guys want to talk about. Oh god, there's a couple of super chats that I missed. In interviews with Monster Girls, there's a Dollahan Machi with a very interesting design for a Slice of Life series. Right, we can bring that up. What about the Osamodas from Wakfu Dofus? I'm not familiar with Wakfu. Are you?
No, actually. I'm familiar enough to recognize it as a French cartoon, basically. But other than that, I have not watched it much myself. Plus, it's actually kind of old.
Oh god, it's another WebP. God damn it. Just use PNG. That's what it was invented for. God, freaking. Okay, let's just.
From the audience is Nezuko from Demon Slayer considered a monster girl? And the answer is quite yes. She was affected with monstrous traits. When she acts out her monstrous persona, she takes on like the monster's veins, the cat eyes, and especially the claws, right? And she acts when she's fighting particularly feral. But obviously she's supposed to be more girl than monster, and a bunch of the story's fundamental like plot is to pursue how to get the monster out of her in the first place, which she mostly does herself.
Yeah, I've not seen Demon Slayer, so I can't really comment. I just know a lot of people like Imoto-chan, yeah.
Oh yeah.
But this was the one that was brought up with this, which is the Dullahan from Interviews with Monster Girls, and that's a manga that I've actually read. And yeah, like this is a pretty solid Monster Girl design, because like there's 99% girl, but the 1% that's monster is impossible to ignore.
Yep.
Which is the fact that she's holding her head in her hands and there's fire coming out of her neck.
Dullahan designs are always kind of fun, especially from Durarara.
Oh yeah, Durarara. That's such a good anime.
Oh yeah, that was a lot of fun, especially as an example of Dullahan. But yeah, the fact that you cannot ignore the fact that she is inhuman is what makes the Dullahan designs like subtly kind of OP. Honestly, they're a lot of fun. With a lot of like Monster Girls, if you simply remove like a couple feathers here and there, or change it, or like gave them earmuffs to cover any like non-human ears, they could pass as human really easily. But try to pass a Dullahan without like putting their head back on. That's impossible.
Yeah, and like I do think like specifically with Interview with Monster Girls, as a design, I wish, because one of the things about her is that she's always carrying her head around in her arms, and that's made her really strong, actually. Which is where, like, visually, I wouldn't mind if that was represented, like if she actually had visibly muscular upper body. Like sort of as part of like the thing that sort of transgresses against like what's the typical expectation of a cutesy anime schoolgirl. Well, not that she's fucking ripped, for sure. So that to me would be interesting, but like, yeah, just the fact that you can't, like, that she's got her freaking head in her arms, it just makes it a cool design. It makes it interesting and appealing. And it also makes it interesting because you can place the eyes pretty much anywhere you want, like the face, which messes around a lot with the way that you perceive a character. It's a good character design. But the other thing I was downloading was the unavoidable one, I suppose, which is Monster Musume.
Yeah.
I don't know how familiar you are with the series.
Perhaps more than I really should be. I'm also familiar with a lot of the Monster Musume doujin works, especially that goes even further in depth on the diversity of species. In a lot of ways, Monster Musume codified Monster Girls for anime in particular, and the general scene around it. And well, there is a lot of fun to be had here, especially with like how creative they get, as long as you ignore the more fan servicey elements, right? Like a slime girl portrayed as basically not having any neurons whatsoever. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like I am very familiar with Monster Musume because it's one of my, I wouldn't say guilty pleasure because I do not feel guilty about my pleasures, but it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, I read it, but I don't advertise it, because it's only gotten hornier over the years somehow, which is weird, despite never actually transitioning fully into pornography somehow. But yeah, like I do think Monster Musume was like a break point for Monster Girls in anime, like you said. Like I really do think it's a lot more influential than a lot of people are willing to own up to, in the way that it handles its designs. And I will say, sort of broadly speaking, Monster Musume is one of the better Monster Girl animes in terms of making the girls like clearly non-human, like clearly marking them out
Absolutely.
as not human. They're still very cutesy anime girls with pretty stereotypical anime haircuts and giant titties, just absolutely humongous titties. It's not even, when you read the fucking thing, it's every third female character could like feed a nation. But yeah, it's like, it's one of the better ones. But my favorite character design from Monster Musume has to be Arachnia. Because here is an interesting way to do the Drider. Like, here's an interesting way to do the Black Widow spider archetype. Like, when you think of League of Legends, for example, we have Elise, who on the one hand, most of the time runs around as a sexy lady with the titties out, and, like, she has this black spider suit on that I don't understand how she successfully seduces anyone who doesn't immediately realize she's gonna kill them. But Ragnarok, I think...
millennials, right?
Yeah. But Ragnarok, I think, is a substantially better execution of that, because here you keep, like, it's something that seems like it should be such a tedious sexualization, which is that she still has her human legs, more or less. Like, that she's not a centaur character, that she still keeps, like, the human legs, more or less. But here, the legs replace the spider's pedipalps, which are the little mouth parts that a spider uses to eat, and also where their poisonous fangs are. That's the space it occupies in the spider's anatomy here, being used instead to give her humanoid, human-looking legs. And then you have, like, just this hot girl attached to what is a very clearly dangerous, deadly, and rather unpleasant-looking... Fuck off, Mr. Man on scooter. I have to have my windows open. It's so fucking hot. Fuck off.
No, I totally get it. It's like 98 degrees, no, 94 now, but 94 Fahrenheit here, which in terms of Celsius is translates as too much. Too much.
Yeah.
So yeah, I totally get it. But yeah, no, honestly, I love this design. Tongue-tied. I love this design specifically because as sexy as the legs are, and I definitely would not say I'm not a legs man, it's also blatantly, those legs are going to pull you into her maw. And that is symbolic in so many ways, in so many fun and very dangerous ways.
Yeah, and I really do think that she's a great character design because, like, she embodies that, like, the thing I've been harping on about this entire stream, the tension with humanity, where, yeah, this is definitely a sexy lady, 110% a sexy lady, who comes with some things attached, who comes with some things that maybe are not so sexy to most people, attached to her as well, which makes her interesting. I also like that she has multiple eyes and weird pupils. Like, that's also a nice little detail. To make her look more inhuman. But, like, I really like Ragnara's character design from Monster Musume. As for the rest of them, it's like, I do wish that Mia, for example, had more specifically snake-like characteristics, like big fangs or whatever. I do wish that, like, Centauria had a bit more of, like, more horse characteristics just besides being having a lower horse body. Like, I have lots of criticisms of it, but yeah, influential and important for monster girls in anime. There's a couple of super chats I need to deal with. Hang on. I didn't know you liked Durarara. What do you think of Isaiah? He's not a monster girl, so he's not really, like, I think he's an interesting character, but not really relevant to this particular stream. Dragon King, you sent a super chat and then didn't say anything, and then you sent one and said something, so I have to imagine that's because something went wrong for you. I'm sorry about that. I would recommend checking out Dreicha Hammerdreth and Lady Oleander from Warhammer Age of Sigmar. Let's take a look. I don't know them off the top of my head, but I am going to Google. Ooh!
Yeah,
oh, this is cool.
Awesome.
Oh, just a sec. Again, it's fucking WebP.
Yeah. While you're Googling, I would say that what I enjoy about Monster Musume, except when it turns into basically softcore porn, like with the onsen chapters, is that they do a lot of exploration about, like, the culture and the, like, the general, like, uniqueness of the monster cultures themselves, right? Like, the fact that they are not strictly human affects how their culture develops, affects their relationships, and because of the series, their mating rituals, and that's honestly a lot more fun than to treat them as a standard like comedy harem, except with monster parts.
Yeah, that's the other thing that's actually that's the kind of what keeps me reading Monster Musume, is that it keeps sort of trying to engage with the characters as monsters, like the ways that influences their culture, and also just like, hey, if you want to have monster girls living in your house has to be massively modified. Like, you have to have things put in, and, like, giant baths and all kinds of climate controls. And by the way, this is late what's the name? Dreicha Hammerdreth from Warhammer Age of Sigmar. And yes, this is a cool-ass monster girl design. This fucking rules. This is why I like Warhammer sometimes. It's really fucking cool. So this is clearly a dryad of some kind, right?
That's a dryad mech.
Yeah, a dryad that's basically using, like, an ent as a mecha to ride around in, which fucking baller.
That's fun.
Yeah, it's got
I'm not sure
insects
about the fact that she's basically naked, but
yeah, she's naked, but, like, there's no nipples, which means she's not naked. She's got, like, I like the incorporation of trypophobia imagery, like with the hives. Honestly, holy shit, this is cool. This is rad. Like, this is a great monster girl design. I don't know about the character, anything about them, but there is, again, that tension where, oh yeah, hot, sexy lady with the titties, and then you see the face and the hair and the body, and like, oh no, not so sexy.
Dryad mech.
Man, a dryad using an ent as a mech, that is fucking baller. That rules. Oh, that's cool. Yeah. And then we had the other one. Yeah. Which is Lady Oleander.
I was just going to say the clearly non-human face is also another aspect. In this one, Yeah, for the same reason why we like the ghost characters from the Ruined Isles, the Shadow Isles, is also why this one fundamentally works. Like, sure, you can see underneath with the with what skin type clothing on a chest level to be female, but then everything else is horrifying, reminiscent of death.
Yeah, and in terms of being a ghost design, very clever thing to have basically, like, she has the classical ghost aesthetic, which is to be a person covered in a sheet, but then when you look underneath the sheet, there's no body there. So it's just this empty haunted sheet floating around with like a skull face, and yeah, that's again a cool way to make a creepy monster girl character out of
Also,
bringing it intention.
Would not be able to handle this.
What?
My 3D printer would not be able to handle this model.
No, I think that's very much what Warhammer, like what Games Workshop is counting on, is like making their characters too elaborate for 3D printers, at least for a while yet. Yeah. Otherwise, they're screwed. Maybe
if I had a proper resin printer, but those are finicky to work with. And honestly, I'm visually and just like constructively, I'm impressed with the overall aesthetics of this model. This looks expensive. This looks really expensive. Freaking Warhammer, man.
Right. More super chats coming in. Someone says Rosine from Berserk, and this is where I wish I'd... Goddamn wet pee again. This is where I wish I had read Berserk, but I am going to find her and save a PNG copy, which is actually fucking useful. Internet. Or maybe just fucking Adobe start working with WebP. That would be nice. So here she is, and she's a moth girl as far as I can tell. She's a child desperately trying to live out a Peter Pan fantasy through a monstrous transformation. Also, the manga Claymore has some cool geekerish monsters. But yeah, this is a little bit in the vein of QB, in terms of her visual and the aesthetic design, where it's like mostly human, but then there's those eyes and like the tentacles and those extra arms that make her sort of like, oh, something else is going on here.
Let me see, because it's not on screen yet.
Oh, shit. No, fuck that. Yeah, it's because I've messed up. There we go. It should show up for you now.
Ah, yes. Oh, yeah, very much a moth monster. Even if she's clearly female. Well, let me see. Yeah, clearly she's female. Clearly her, I'm guessing those are familiars, are also supposed to be blatantly, like, young girls. But the moth impression, especially with the eyes, dominates the overall view. Like, this is clearly a moth that's imitating humanity rather than the other way around. The familiars less so. They're basically cupids. They're basically like the traditional, like, Renaissance era, like, depiction of, like, cherubs.
Yeah.
But as a central character, yeah, this is definitely a good depiction of Moth Girl.
Yeah, it's like I quite like the use of the wings and the way that it's really nicely composed too. Miura was damn good at what he did. I'm trying to get to the super chats because I kind of want people pay for us to look at them, so I kind of want to get to that. An interesting monster girl I like a lot is Van Hoch. Yes, that Van Hoch from Fate Grand Order. Let's see.
Oh man, Fate Grand Order has a lot of. I could go on and on about Fate Grand Order, and I have a couple on the list we made earlier. But honestly, there's too much to cover with that particular franchise, and especially when like about 80% of the character design is meant to be basically fan service. Van Gogh, however, which is one of the newer ones, I should know because I haven't played for a while. That's definitely one of the newer ones. Is part of I believe the Foreigner archetype, which are all inspired as like corruptions by Lovecraftian entities.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I'm finding images of her 3 stages here for us to use, which is going to take a second because WebP again. All the wikis use WebP. It's fucking annoying.
Yeah, I'm guessing there's some kind of like
it must be
traffic saving reason for that.
Well, that's the thing, because WebP files are exactly the same size as PNG files because they are PNG files, just contained in a different container that makes them fucking impossible to use with anything. Very annoying. There we go. There's stage 1, where it's just like a person with a sunflower, because Van Gogh, of course. Also a girl, which Van Gogh was not. And apologies to any Dutch people in the audience. I'm trying to pronounce the name moderately correctly. Don't know how well I'm doing.
Yeah.
And then it progresses through...
It's Fate Grand Order in first place. Yeah. It's Fate Grand Order, so gender swapping is quite the opposite of uncommon. In fact, it's more expected than not. But yeah, you can see the corruption here taking place as whatever entity she's bonded with or was fused with slowly takes over her as she gains in power. Because Van Gogh is not exactly what you consider a warrior hero, right? A warrior legend. So in terms of the mythology and the logic behind Fate Grand Order, in order to get her more powerful, something has to take place. And trying to say that she isn't gender swapped, if I recall correctly, she fundamentally, this is not just Van Gogh, but multiple characters fused into one being, and Van Gogh, if anything, as being the lesser trait for that character.
Okay, so just the naming character, basically.
I've missed quite a few chapters recently, so I don't have the full lore, but that's as I understand it. Artists in Grand Order especially tend to be portals for ambivalently beneficial entities, as you can see with the Lovecraftian influence.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say it qualifies as a monster girl. It's a little bit sort of on the more human side, but by the end there with the weird flower hands and just the general weirdness and the little tentacles coming out, yeah, I'd say like she looks like a jellyfish, basically. So I'd say it qualifies.
Unfortunately, Fate Grand Order has a lot of Lycon art, so I wouldn't exactly explore too much into this.
Yeah,
space.
I'm not planning to Google around around it too much.
Yeah.
But I will say shout outs to the artist who created this artwork for accurately imitating Van Gogh's style, his expressionism in the backgrounds. That's really well done. That's cool.
Yeah. They've got a lot better because they have more than enough money to hire some of the best artists in the industry now. So, so that's the thing about that. Actually, if you look at the folder, I think I have a couple of other Fate Grand Order examples. If you go look for what file was it? Where do I have it on the list?
Let's see. What's the name?
Kijo Koyo.
Oh.
And look up the one labeled Kijo 1.
Yoink, that one? The literal T-Rex?
This is technically a monster girl. This is technically a monster girl.
Yeah,
I'm just gonna let it simmer there for a moment.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, because so something we've talked about previously is sort of the like, why would a species that's completely different from humanity present in a way that's like humanly feminine? And we're seeing like the sort of natural consequence of that right there, which is like, okay, so let's not have the character present feminine in their physical shape whatsoever, except that they probably look like what a female T-Rex might look like physically. But then on top of that, they have hair. Like they give her a hat and long, flowy black hair and like a coat on top of it, which gives her that, like, enough to make her not an animal.
Yeah,
it's really clever.
Now, the more familiar you get, the more bonding you get with the character, the more human she gets. So as you've brought up the second file for her, it's much more blatantly like a Japanese woman, but you still see the characteristics behind her, right? You see
the tail,
that her hands. Yeah, you see that she's still monstrous. She still has horns. You see that her hands haven't transformed all the way either, and that giant tail behind her trails off for literal miles. At least it looks like that.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that is pretty. That's Fate as well.
Yep.
Well done. That's a cool monster girl design. Like, that's again the tension with humanity, very much so. That's still, and I do like that they don't just fully transform her into a cute girl, but that she still retains like actual lizard aspects. Like I can see it on her legs and feet as well. That's really cool. Plus, just very good art. Damn.
I would definitely say this is one of the more successful interpretations in Fate Grand Order for Monster Girl. Not just the what's basically a bit of a joke depiction with her in full T-Rex mode, but also when she's actually fully transformed. Like even after that, this is clearly something more than human, which belies both like the standard like divinity in Shinto mythology, which something that's a little more than human, but also something that's a little less because of the more reptilian characteristics involved.
Yeah, that's really cool. I need to look into that a little bit more carefully.
Yeah, Fate being what it is, it's mostly a landmine of really fetish art.
Yeah,
But,
I can imagine. But someone brought up Eilish Norn from Magic the Gathering, and I'm not familiar,
Yeah.
but what her title was Chief Cenobite, which kind of gives away where she's from.
yeah.
Well, I don't know if it's specifically connected to fuck it. What's the name of the film franchise with a cube? Helltaker, right?
No, that's the game.
Ah,
That's a new game with a well-dressed demon woman. What was it?
Hellraiser. There it
that's
is.
Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, Elish Norn, which I am familiar with because I was playing in that era. You can see that she has a lot of crossover characteristics with how Diablo 4 presents Lilith.
Yeah.
Which is that she's very blatantly and sensually female, and yet there's nothing here that suggests sexy times. This is everything here that suggests death, dismemberment, and possibly losing your sanity along the way.
Yeah. Yeah, this is again one of those very cool designs where the character design is blatantly sexualized. Like it's clearly with like the wide hips and the titty and all of like the titty shapes. There's a clear sexualization, but not one that's meant to titillate you traditionally. Like this one is transgressive, definitely transgressive. This is scary. Like this is Silent Hill Nurses kind of scary, where it uses its sexuality to enhance the uncanniness. That's a very cool monster design.
And same way as how we say that obscuring the face, especially gives a very eerie characteristic to her design. Like this is especially emphasized. It was basically a massive like a cross between a helmet and like a nun's habit.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. A nun habit. You're actually right about that. Yeah, there is definitely that aspect of religiosity to it.
This is fundamentally like how magic depicts the white element in the game, and that is also be highly they're supposed to be almost theologically obsessed with order and stability and everything else. And as Chaz is saying, she is a priestess of her villainous faction, and that's how she's supposed to be expressed, right? Like her whole body is devoted to order, to re-engineering towards Phyrexian goals. And the fact that she's sexy about transgresses with what we assume to be the standard for nuns, for like women in religious orders as well. So there is like a sense of corruption here, especially with the blood leaking over the sides of the white plating, and as well as just the fundamental designs of like combining fundamentalist theology with like human sensuality or like organic sensuality.
Yeah. That's very, very cool. Another design that got brought up in the super chat is Entoma from Overlord. And this is one that I'm quite familiar with. And this is, again, a Monster Girl design that I really, really like, because the face that Entoma has, which is this very stereotypical cutesy anime maid, that's not her face. That's not her face at all. That's a mask. A mask with a voice module changer inside it that makes her voice more cutesy and girlsy, woo woo. Like, it's literally the ooh-woo voice that people put on TikTok to make jokes. That's what she has. But when that mask is shattered, or when she, like, loses that voice box, she's not that cute anymore. She's a terrifying bug monster that will consume your insides and, like, send giant, like, centipede arms out through those giant sleeves. Very scary thing when the mask falls off. This is a Monster Girl design from anime I really like.
Yeah. This is fundamentally the same reason why I like QB so much, right? And that what she looks like as a flat two-dimensional representation is completely opposed to actually how she moves around and functions and what she is as a character. And I assume that she and QB and some kind of crossover will either get along very well or very poorly for the exact same reasons.
Just a sec, there's fuck off! Another loud scooter. I swear to God, half the people who drive scooters in this town, like, they drill holes through, like, the muffler to make the fucking thing louder.
Yeah, they do. I had the same issue when I was haunting the streets of Taipei for a couple years. Also very scooter-heavy country. Also full of scooter mods. In fact, I lived above, for a while, a garage of scooter technicians that would, to my amusement, be talking about League of Legends strategies in between repairs.
Someone asked about Camille in Awaken, so I'm just trying to find a picture that works. I'll grab this one. That seems okay. Yay, it's not a wet pea. Let's get rid of Toma for a sec. There. Yeah, so Camille in Awaken, I quite like because, as the super chat says, they sharpened her. Like, they made her more specifically, like, especially the legs, they sharpened them up and made them look much more like specifically robot legs, and they emphasized very much her glowing eyes, glowing like blue and orange, which made her much more inhuman. And yeah, I think that definitely pushes her further into Monster Girl territory. Like, it definitely makes her more monster-ish. Just an activate Windows mark in the bottom right of this image.
Well, she is getting very dangerously close to being the same sort of feature as Oriana fundamentally. So perhaps she needs to upgrade her software.
But definitely this pushes her much closer into Monster Girl territory because it emphasizes the inhuman parts of her nature rather than just giving her big booty, which is let's be honest, what her main character design does because it rounds off the curves so hard. Yeah. I'm sorry if I cause people some stress in mentioning this, but where do the My Little Ponies fall along this line? Okay. They don't, I would say. Like, I'd say that the My Little Pony characters are very explicitly designed to be horse characters. Like, they're very specifically designed to be ponies. And I don't think there's much monster girlness over them, because they're not really centaurs. Like, they're not designed, like, they have cutesy humanoid characteristics, but they're not monster girls, I would say. Unless they were actually designed as centaurs in some sub-series I don't know about, then no, I wouldn't call them monster girls.
They would be more accurately described as girlish monsters rather than monster girls.
Yeah, if you were to try and look for a definition, I would say so.
And the order of the words matter a lot there. A lot.
Let's see. There was... Oh yeah, I'm bringing this one up just to please one of my mods who's quite fond of her. Makoto Nanaya, who I think you put artwork of them into the folder.
Yeah.
Squirrel
same
Girl?
game as Squirrel Girl as a fighting game character. An extremely blatantly sexy Squirrel Girl. I brought her up to contrast with Kawakaka, actually. And that there's definitely, like, despite how big her tail is, she's fundamentally more of a human character than she is a monster girl, right? Like, even in terms of how she fights and how she walks around, there's more emphasis on the human traits. She punches things. She punches things very, very hard. And also her boobs are hanging out.
Yeah, there's like severe underboob on that character design. Quite a bit of it, too. Someone sent a super chat saying the robot head girl. Oh, okay, I see. Yeah. Right. Okay, let me see if I can find a good picture of this character there. That should do the trick. Because this leans us way more heavily into horror, this seems to be some concept art of her, specifically cyber horror, I'd say. Now, Soma, as far as I remember, is specifically sort of a cyber horror game.
Yeah.
Like some Matrix elements and stuff. And yeah, this is again that thing of like, how far do you go before you're more of a monster than a monster girl?
Honestly, I would say this is pretty much 90% monster at this rate. Even looking at her face, it looks more like she was horrifyingly overtaken by some kind of like techno-organic virus than she is like a fusion between monster and humanity, right? Like,
yeah.
That's not the face of like somebody that's willingly undergone augmentation. That looks like somebody that was murdered from the inside out.
Yeah, I mean, this looks more like in terms of like the infection from like The Last of Us, like the mushroom infection. This looks more like a zombification, like in terms of like being infected by something, rather than being rather than being a zombie girl, being a girl who got turned into a zombie. But now you're not like a girl anymore. You're just a monster. At least that's what that character design feels like to me. Good lord, more super chats. Another great monster girl from Warhammer is Lusaka Vai, one of the new vampires. Let's see if I can find a good picture of her. And in the meantime...
Well, that's a fun question. Is GLaDOS a monster girl?
Oh, that's a good question, actually. Because sort of...
I don't say she counts. I would say she just barely counts. But not because of how she's physically portrayed, but because of the lore. Just because of lore. She's it's way too late to count this as a spoiler, but she's basically a human brain forcibly turned into a cybernetic administrator for the entire facility. And there's still traces of that humanity involved, but what you consider GLaDOS isn't the floating head and the cores that you have to deal with, but basically the entire facility is GLaDOS.
Yeah, and with GLaDOS specifically, I think there's an argument to be made that she's a monster girl because, and it's I'm trying to find some art that actually depicts it properly, but the way that her hanging body is constructed, it looks a little bit like someone is,
Oh right, I saw that one.
yeah, it looks a little bit
Basically,
like a suspended human body upside down. Just the way that she's constructed as a physical. Oh, here's something that works. Doink. That should do the trick. Okay. So you can kind of see it here a little bit. If you think of like this central area here is her chest, head, and then the body itself and spine bent backwards and sort of suspended from the ceiling in a sort of a slightly sort of shibari bondage kind of suspension thing going on. Which I think is a valid interpretation of her character design, actually. Like, I think because specifically GLaDOS' story is about being this human woman who is very forcibly turned into this thing in a way that's not at all pleasant, and which, like, they removed some of the voice lines pertaining to her actual, like, to the moment when she's actually taken from the game because they were just way too rapey. Like, they were way too sort of assault-coded. But that's basically her story, is that she's someone who had her bodily autonomy taken away from her, very much so by Aperture Science. And so the interpretation of her, like, as a sort of completely exploded human form suspended from the ceiling, is, I think, a valid one, and an interesting one in terms of what the Portal games are trying to say about, like, science and scientific progress beyond all the sort of silly parody that they're doing.
Yeah, I think it's quite valid.
And then there was a super chat asking for Lusaka Vi from Warhammer, and yes, this is actually also a pretty cool monster design because we have a centaur here, except the centaur is some kind of horrifying bat from which emerge a vampire lady on top. That's definitely a cool monster design.
That's fun.
Like
And
we've said previously in the
beyond the
stream,
fact that she has-
Warhammer are good at monster girls.
Yeah, they're generally really good at combining the human with the horror. Quite literally in this case. But yeah, and also, like, beyond the fact that she has breastplate, which is just one of the fundamental issues with that overall school design. Like, she's otherwise, the only thing that's feminine about her is maybe the hair. Otherwise, she's just an armored badass with the body of a vampiric horror. With its guts hanging out, it seems.
Yeah, that's a cool ass little monster design right there. I quite like that. Right, I'm trying to get to all the super chats because I don't want anyone to spend money without getting at least something in return. Let's see. Valkia the Bloody. That's another Warhammer.
Sounds like it.
Oh yeah, that's more of a traditional.
suggested.
Yeah, that's more of a traditional demon girl character design, and it's a web P again because of course it is.
Yeah.
At least I've
I
gotten
love the
good at
interest.
converting them quickly now. Oh, that's Fengo. Where the hell did she go? There she is. There she is. That's a more of a, like, typical traditional sort of horned demon lady.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, a perfectly good
I love
monster
the
design,
shield. Yeah.
but I don't think
This
much
is
to say about it.
Yeah, honestly, this is a very traditional depiction of, like, a winged demon. The shield is probably the most notable aspect of this because a devouring shield is definitely a little more askew from like traditional representation. But yeah, otherwise it's just a fundamentally solid classic design.
Yeah, and then there was someone asking about Scorpia from She-Ra, and I haven't really watched that show. Unfortunately, I've sort of absorbed by osmosis from other people. But yeah, Scorpia is one of the cooler character designs from She-Ra specifically, again, because of the way her design interacts with femininity. and feminine presentation, because first of all, she's short-haired, which like is always sort of more butch-coded, but like she has the lipstick, she has the eyelashes, she has a feminine shape. Like you can see that there is like the curvature of breasts there, and like she's got hips and wide thighs, but like she's much more on like the butch spectrum of feminine presentation, which is pretty rare. Like it's really rare that you get characters at all who play with like butch aesthetics even a little bit. So like this is pretty cool to me.
I'm solid, yes. Although I would argue that a lot of my impression of her is that they took what's basically a lady in red armor and just added like 2 continents and a tail to it. So in terms of like how monstrous she is, I mean, she's a strong, aggressive looking character, but I'm not sure if she's all that monstrous actually.
I mean, she has scorpion claws for hands.
What? Right, but what I'm saying is that they can easily be assumed to be like a form of like armor or embellishment, right?
Oh, no, I think it's her physical characteristic. I don't think she can take those off.
Really?
Nope.
Interesting. Fun. Kind of makes dinners awkward, but fun.
Well, I'm sure she has a way. But yeah, I quite like that. Like, and certainly it's a far cry. Let me find a picture, see if I can find Scorpia from the original She-Ra, because she's much less interesting as a character design, to be quite honest.
Well, the original series was a product of its time, and not just a product, but a product placement show. So,
yeah, this is the original Scorpia from She-Ra. It's just, and so here's a production history thing about the He-Man show, and like all the spin-offs and things like that. A lot of these shows were made because toy companies were like, okay, we have these molds of toys, of old toys that we haven't sold in ages. We can paint them however we like, but we have all these freaking molds, and they got a bunch of like journeyman writers together in a room and said, okay, write some kind of cartoon that has all of these characters in it, and like we'll just paint them to look like so that they look more or less proper together. But like just fucking take it was just this complete mishmash of assorted nonsense action figures that these writers were like, okay, shit, I guess we have to find some way to make this shit fit. Which is why you have He-Man battling Skeletor alongside Fisto, the man with a giant fist made of steel, riding battle. Like, they were not meant to fit together. Like, these designs were never created, like, to really work together. It was more a thing of, like, we have all these things and we might as well make some money off them. Make a cartoon about them to make them sell. And so they did. And She-Ra is very much the same kind of situation.
And somehow they did enough of a job where an entire generation of geeks and nerds are fully infatuated with it and get really, really angry if you suggest that the shows should be changed or updated in any way. Yeah. To my eternal frustration. Yeah,
God, like the way that people got mad about the changes made to She-Ra, fucking hell. She looks like a boy. Fuck you. Have you never seen a girl in your life?
Especially, have you not seen like Fitz talk? Those women are not only attractive, they're also extremely muscular.
Yeah, it's just fucking fragile dudes. So here's the Countess from Darkest Dungeon, a game I've not played far enough to meet her, but here again we have like clearly, like it's the insect lady thing again. But yeah, that's a pretty compelling version of it, like combining the sort of hyperfemme, sort of Victorian, well, not Victorian, Louis XIV Versailles, really Marie Antoinette aesthetics with a grub body, a bug body.
A horrifying bug body with a lot of thorns, especially along the back. And you can just see like the hint of blood on her face right behind the fan. This is honestly really good, horrifying design.
Yeah, this is scary as shit. Like, especially with the fan clearly hiding some kind of horribly disfigured bottom face.
Or perhaps you just finished her meal. Because you look under the fan, you see that the stains go beyond the neck and beyond the cleavage, and it's stripping down her dress. She's a feeder, all right.
Yeah. Right, let's see. There was another one from Fate, Baoban Trist, and I'm looking at her here. And
oh, she's definitely one of the newest ones.
She's certainly also a very horny character design. I wouldn't say she looks that much like a monster girl to me. I can try and bring her up, but again, we're WebP, so boink.
Yeah.
Let me just give me a sec here. There we go. That seems more like just a goth girl to me. Like, besides the pointy ears.
Yeah, she shares a lot of fundamental characteristics, especially signifiers, with the other vampires in the game.
Oh, she's a vampire. Oh, that makes sense.
Partial vampire. Fae, actually. I forgot what exactly she was supposed to represent, but there's definitely some vampiric tendencies, some sadistic tendencies, which you can sort of tell with the heels in the background. Boy, that's one hell of a shoe collection, huh?
Yeah. Shut up.
But yeah.
Goddamn, computer giving me trouble. There we go. Here's her second phase. That's more explicitly monstrous to me, at least.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or third phase.
You see what looks like. You see what the claws coming out of her look like rib cages, which I think is probably the best aspect of this design. Like, this is going beyond like simply like disturbing, right? This is outright like threatening. Like, if she embraces you, you're not coming out of it with just a couple scratches.
Yeah, and it's definitely, like, she's definitely extremely hyper-feminine. Like, especially with those enormous pumps and heels, like, to the point where it's kind of caricatured. It's like a parody of it, almost. That's actually kind of compelling. Because, like, her base form, I was just like, isn't that just a goth girl? But I guess it was a vampire. But this right here, that's some scary monster shit. That's pretty cool.
This is definitely what I would consider a depiction of the succubus, not just as an object of lust, but also danger. Like, clearly you're supposed to lust after her to some extent, but the way that her rib cage is about to really do a number on your lungs. You're kind of torn between being attracted to her and also want to run as fast as possible in the opposite direction.
Yeah, quite cool. Someone sent a super chat asking for Ada 1 from Destiny. Now, I've never played Destiny, so I know nothing about it, but looks to me like we've got a robot woman on our hands here, and quite a cool-looking one at that. What I find interesting about this one is the way that it presents femininity, because it's very subtle. Like, it's not a sexualized lady robot with, like, hourglass shape and big hips. You can see some feminine shape in there. But it's not much. It comes more through her posture, really.
Combination of the posture, and I think some of the face shape is maybe the primary identifier, actually.
Yeah.
The cheekbones, the eyes especially.
Yeah, the eyes sort of imitate eyelashes and heavy makeup. Yeah, you're right about that. That's cool.
Yep. And, like, there's something to the torso shape as well, but honestly, the litheness is not, like, uniquely a feminine identifier, and there's honestly a lot of characters. I haven't played Destiny in years, but there are a lot of characters that are emphasizing like agility and speed and stuff like that. It's still like are called masculine, but it's definitely around the faces thing, the eyelashes especially, that's supposed to present her as feminine.
Yeah, and someone said Shiva from Mortal Kombat 11, and I'm quite interested to talk about this one because this is one of the better things that Mortal Kombat has been doing recently. Mortal Kombat began its life as extremely 90s cheese. Like, just extremely 90s cheese to just a cartoonishly overwrought extent. And it was always a self-parody. Like, that's something that modern people sometimes forget about Mortal Kombat is it was always a parody. It was always a ridiculous satire of itself. It has never once in its entire life taken itself seriously. Until more recent times when some people started insisting, no, it's actually really cool and serious, but don't change any of the character designs. And yeah, there was definitely some pushback to characters like Shiva and Melina being pushed away from just being like hot ladies who were hot, and like Melina had like her weird mouth and Shiva had 4 arms, but they were just like hot ladies. This is a lot more compelling to me as like a warrior character, just overall.
I mean, if you look carefully, her leather chest piece is a skull.
Yeah.
That's not only creative, also a lot better than the simple like leather bikini.
Yeah. That's way better. That's a very clever, cool way to create a character. Plus, she has visible muscle. Like, she looks like she could actually break you in half, which is what she can do in Mortal Kombat, among other things.
And what do we tend to want these days?
yeah, definitely like, a cool monster girl design.
If you don't think that this is a major upgrade to her, like her, especially the late 90s, early 2000s representation, man, we just don't have a lot of things in common at that point, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, it's so weird because it's this mindset where, like, it's a fucking male mindset too, but it's that mindset where if this thing is not pandering to me, then it must be pandering to someone else. Like, because that's the only lens through which they can understand media, is it's pandering to someone, and if it's not me, then I get mad. Like, where they can't understand, hey, maybe sometimes it's not pandering, maybe it's actually trying to express something fundamentally in terms of its design, or it's trying to express some kind of human feeling, but no, pandering. Everything is pandering, absolutely everything, and if it's not pandering to me, then it's politics. It's like, fucking God, just see art outside of your own fucking myopic self-actualization, you little toad. But that's a different can of worms.
But even past all that, how can you not find a skull leather bustier cool?
Yeah.
That's a skull.
How is that not badass as shit?
You have no taste. I say. They just don't think hard enough. At least they don't think with the right thing that's hard.
So someone sent a super chat asking about Yinu's mother from NSR, and I don't know what that is. But I'm finding pictures of it, and apparently it's this character. And then sometimes she gets angry and looks terrifying and monstrous, but I cannot find a decent resolution image of that. What the heck is NSR? Oh, No Straight Roads. Ah.
I can't say I'm familiar with that franchise, with that media, unfortunately. In terms of whether they're actually supposed to turn monstrous, what that like hole in the center of the face tells me is that her having human head is only coincidental, and it depends on the mood. But I'm simply guessing at this point.
Yeah, what I'm looking at from the other artwork is that basically she seems to be like a sort of extremely overprotective, angry mother archetype, and when she gets pissed, she gets like much more explicitly monstrous.
As they do. That's always fun. That's always a fun trope to play with. Could be overused sometimes, but
yeah, I mean, at its worst, it sort of plays into the whole like, oh, women so emotional. It kind of plays into that shit, but when it's used well, like it's much more like it's about bringing like again using the monster as a representation of power.
Yeah.
Very cool. Oh god, more super chats. I'm trying to keep up. Okay, Kit Icarus, Medusa. Oh, interesting. That's actually not bad. Medusa. Gonna grab you there and put you on the screen. Bonk.
Oh, Medusa's always been a fun design for artists to explore in the first place, because a sentient, massive snake here has plenty of spaces to work with.
Yeah.
But although this is not the most monstrous depiction of Medusa I've seen, her costume is definitely the most inventive I've seen in a while.
Yeah, and so a thing to keep in mind is also she's fucking massive, like she's huge in scale inside the game. I couldn't find one that showed scale with Pitt himself, but very... What's with so much hate for straight white guys nowadays, Allspark Productions? Oh, that's a good question. That's a good question. I don't know what anyone could possibly have against the straight white guys as a class of people. I don't know. They've never done anything, have they?
Oh, boy.
Anyway, you're banned from chat. Bye-bye. But yeah, like, this is more of a classic... This is a very classic Medusa, like, where she's beautiful, sort of, to look at, but snake hair makes her scary. I do like... Yeah, I do agree. Like, I like the snake arms, like, the scaly arms that she's got.
Yeah.
That's a cool way to show monstrousness.
That's really nice.
And it's a cool outfit as well. It's nice robes. Like, they are definitely feminine and they're definitely sexy, but they're not like, hey, look at the tits. Like, they're not that kind of sexy, which I quite appreciate.
Obviously, yeah.
The funny thing about Medusa is that
the side boob, but
yeah, the funny thing about Medusa is that originally in the mythology, the way she was designed is she's so hideous and terrifying to look at that she turns you to stone. She's not supposed to be hot.
Yep.
Let's see. Is Khan Maker considered a monster girl? That's a good question. I can't remember what Khan Maker looks like. Oh, no. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Holy shit. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely a monster girl. Monster robot girl. But certainly, yes. Let me bring a picture up. Yoink. Come on. Let me zoom in on that. Because this is absolutely a monster girl to me. Like, specifically a monster robot girl. But that's definitely...
Yeah.
That definitely falls within in the purviews of the category we've defined.
Yeah, it definitely falls within. Not familiar enough with the franchise to know how much humanity or girl is involved in this, but the monsterness is definitely unquestionable, as is the feminine traits.
Yeah, and I do like I like the use of the heavy cheekbones and the eyes to imply the femininity. Like, she has the titty, but it's like barely noticeable on her figure, really. Like, it's not emphasized, it's just there as a presence. Which is like really cool.
She comes off, yeah. The boobs come off more as a statue aspect rather than something that's supposed to find organic and attractive. Like, just as a signifier that this statue is supposed to represent human-ish female, right? Or humanoid female.
Yeah, that is definitely a monster girl design. A very cool one, too. That's really nice. I should play Doom Eternal or finish it someday. But that was about a little over 3 hours.
Wow, we went on for a while. Well, we knew whatever you would in the first place, because there's so much ground to cover with this particular topic.
It's a big topic.
Yeah.
But I think
so many examples.
I think we'll probably call it here. So for those of you who are tuned in, if you'd like to see another discussion with me and Lushen here, you can head on over to his channel, where on July 21st, I believe it was, he will be introducing me to VTubers, and we'll talk about their character designs and the ways that they're put together. This is a subject about which I know Corone exists, but that's sort of the extent of my knowledge about the thing. So that should be interesting.
Yep.
You can head on over there.
Talk. Yeah. Channel will be it'll be on my channel on July 21st. VTubers have less diversity, I would say, in body forms, because they're supposed to be conventionally attractive in the first place, but because of the sheer range of different artists involved in the scene and the schools of design, especially between East and West versions, like there'll be plenty of examples, and definitely in terms of what makes a VTuber compelling instead of just like a regular streamer with an anime avatar. Will be definitely something to discuss in depth. Stream link. Let's see. Stream link will be in the description. The stream has been set up, although I do need to fill out more of the description text in there. But otherwise, yeah, we will be going over VTubers, going over the different agencies involved, going over some of the lore, because honestly, it's a lot of fun. And same rules apply as this one. No bigotry. Stay hydrated. Don't get too thirsty. Although the temptation will be probably a little stronger there than it was with some of the more monster scares we saw today.
As I understand it, a lot of VTubers invited.
Yeah.
But yeah, that will be July 21st over on Lushen's channel. There's a link to both the stream, if you just want to bookmark the stream and be ready for a set of reminder, and his channel as well, where he does things and plays video games. Would you like to tell us what you do on the channel besides talk to me?
Yeah, so a lot of things I've been doing lately is just streaming games with I feel compelling narratives. Unfortunately, I kind of bounced off of Persona 5 Strikers, but AI The Somnium Files, for instance, which is basically a visual novel, has been a very, very compelling and weird murder mystery. I also do the occasional 3D printing, because I got my hands on Ender 3 and I have been obsessively tinkering with it. And also just do occasional random skits for YouTube Shorts and TikTok. And honestly, just whatever I feel like doing from any moment. But the games especially, I tend to focus mostly on either XCOM style strategy games or just games with a particularly quirky approach to narrative and storytelling. Those are just significantly more interesting to me than playing like multiplayer fighter shooters. Although I will probably be starting up Guilty Gear Strive because I have the game and I need an excuse to use this hitbox. And I might as well stream it. And it's Guilty Gear, so there's at least plenty of like Arxis for a fighting game company has some of the weirdest damn storytelling out there. Although I don't want to get too deep into BlazBlue. That down there lies the road to madness.
Yeah, I've seen it claim several people on my Twitter timeline already. But yeah, go subscribe to Lushen's channel if you want. Check out the stream once it happens on, again, July 21st. I'm going to pump that into your head so you remember it. Thank you all very much for watching. I hope you had a good time. I hope you enjoyed yourselves. And I'll go away and make a video about Leona and Diana now, I think is what I'm going to do.
At last, the waiting is over.
Yes.
They've kissed!
They have finally kissed, for real. But have a good one, everyone. This was fun.
Yes, that was.
There we go. I'm just going to let the Patreon scroll roll for a little bit, but the stream is functionally over. Yeah, something else. Let me see if I can... we had a... let's see. 348 viewers right now. Oh, where the hell's the peak concurred? Oh, I can't see that yet. I can see that once we end it. But 11,340 playbacks. That's not bad.